I know this is a small room, but we're hoping to record this for future groups that come through, so bear with me with the microphone. But I just wanted to thank you all for coming here today. Does anybody know where you're at? Why you're here? No? We're here for the tacos? You guys are actually our second group of reviewers that are being trained, and we have a few of our seasoned peer court review veterans here in the room as well, so thank you for coming back for more. But you are our second annual group of reviewers being trained for this process. So a little over a year ago, a lot of hard work and dedication of collaboration with Brennedy and NPC research resulted in the binders and the curriculum that you have in front of you here today, and this peer court review process that was based on the national best practice standards for family drug, or all of our drug court types, and what we know works for those, and also took into account our local Colorado best practice standards. And we created an assessment, a best assessment, and this process that would support our courts here in Colorado in evaluating one another in a way that, just as anybody who was in our morning session learned, that really respected the grassroots local control that we value in our courts, but also gave a chance for a learning community to develop statewide to support our network of drug courts, our network of mental health, veterans, family drug courts, DUI courts, and allow us to learn from one another while also moving towards that goal noted in our 2012 statewide evaluation of really evaluating our practice and that continuous quality improvement measure. So last year at CCJC, after our pilot process was complete, we had our first group of reviewers trained. We have 6 courts on the books for this year to complete a peer court review, all voluntary. These are courts that want to be here, want to be participating in this process. And you guys are our second group of reviewers, so thank you. Some of you were very much personally encouraged to varying degrees to attend because we did have some gaps in certain roles or court types that we needed to fill, but we hope that you enjoy this process, and really you guys are in the infancy of how this looks, so we're looking to you to just evolve and develop and make this program as best as it can be. And I'm going to ask Brennedy, do you have anything else you would add at this time? All right, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian, who is joining us from NPC Research, and he's really our guru. NPC Research developed this process, and they have worked with at least, 6, 7 different states?
I've lost track too.
Yeah.
I don't know. Something like that.
Quite a few across the nation on similar forms of this process. So he's here to train us all and be our expert.
I think if you want to just hold on to that in case anybody has questions or whatever, so that'll be great. So Dr. Shannon Carey was supposed to be here today. She's actually done all of the peer review trainings, all these ones that we've been doing all across the country. I've attended several of them, and I've been involved with Colorado, Georgia, Minnesota, a little bit in Washington State too, but she is the lead on this. She's a really great resource, and it's a big loss today that she can't be here. It's very unfortunate, but she's been working in the drug court field for over 20 years now. She's really seen it evolve over time, and seen the changes that go into the treatment court system. And she's been a part of, I think, our running tally now is probably around 200 process outcome and cost evaluations. So she's a really good resource, and she's also a faculty member for the National Drug Court Institute, which is the training arm of the National Association for Drug Court Professionals. So it's a very big loss that we can't have her today, unfortunately. She had a family emergency, and you see that she's probably littered all over your state conference agenda. She's like that every state that she goes to, and again, that just kind of speaks to her knowledge and her expertise. So I say all of that to kind of try to lower the bar for myself, because I know you guys are maybe expecting her, so I'm hoping that you'll grade on a curve if you have to do one of those grading things after the fact. So, but you're just stuck with me today, unfortunately, but I'm going to try to do my best, and Again, since I've done a few of these and I've been on so many of the site visits, I might mix up some things, so I'm going to definitely lean on Brenedy and Amy to provide some feedback and clarify anything that you know, may be incorrect. So, but I think we're going to be all right today. So, with that said, I'm Adrian Johnson. My friends call me AJ. I've been telling people that more often because people really like to call me that, apparently. So I answer to either one. That's my childhood nickname. So AJ seems to be a little bit easier to remember. I've been with NPC for about 4 years now. Previously, I was in the state of Missouri, and I worked for the state court's office there for several years. I was a research analyst, so I did a lot of statistics and pulling data out of our case management system that was statewide. And then for the next several years, I was a specialist, so I would do administrative oversight. So basically any drug court that was receiving state funding from the state of Missouri, which was pretty much all of them. Also, when they receive that funding, they have to agree to have site visits and make sure that they're adhering to the 10 key components and that type of thing. So I did that for several years, going around to all the different courts in Missouri. I had an opportunity in 2010 to actually run a drug court, so I jumped all over it. And I got really great experience doing that, doing it hands-on. I think that really helped shape, you know, my knowledge and really get in on the ground there. So I did that for a couple years as well. And it was a grant-funded program, which was really great. I really did enjoy it, but NPC they were the evaluators because we were getting federal money. So Shannon was there, and the day that they came for a visit, they told me that my program was no longer going to be funded. That was the day, they decided to do that when the evaluators came, so it wasn't the best timing that everybody had, but that's when Shannon and we had known each other over time, and she mentioned that they were hiring, and I just kind of said, well, I'm not going to say no to your job offer. I'm going to at least think about it, and you know, I'm going to see what we think. And my wife and I had never been out to Oregon or Portland or anything like that, and we just said, let's go for it, what the heck. And it's just kind of funny, I think, whenever you make these big life decisions, it's really funny how a lot of them come down to, well, why not? Let's just go for it. So we haven't looked back ever since, and it's been really great. So I just kind of tell that's just a little bit of a personal background, so you guys kind of know what my experience is and what I've been working with. And since I've been with NPC, I've worked on a lot of different drug court projects, and they vary pretty greatly, but I'd say for the most part I focus on process evaluations. So I travel out to the drug courts, we do interviews with team members, we do the focus groups with participants, we watch court, we watch staffing, then we write all of that information up into a nice big report. It's usually a good 15, 20 pages long with lots of detail, lots of information in it, and lots of suggestions and recommendations. So that's kind of my niche within the company, and I've done that, I don't know, a good 20, 30 times by now, I'd say, which is pretty in-depth and pretty involved, each one. But counting all of my experience and just everything I've done, I've probably seen about 100 drug courts over all these years, and I will say that each one is very unique and very different. No two are really alike, and the reason I tell you all of this, just because I didn't want to share my story and hope that you guys thought I was that interesting. I wanted to say that because this is exactly what you guys are going to be doing, except on a much more simplified level. You're still going to be doing the team interviews, team member interviews, the focus groups, and the observations. It's just going to be much more simplified, and I think the number one reason for that is that the time. You guys are, everyone's got their normal job duties, so it's really tough to make the time to be able to do this. And also, it's going to create the learning community among each other, amongst all the courts. So that's kind of what we're going for today. I'm going to show you the more stripped down, kind of simplified version of how to do this. And because it's hard to teach somebody who's a practitioner how to do this research-based stuff, in a couple of hours. So we're kind of trying to find that middle ground where you guys are learning and also providing that feedback to the peer review site. So. Does anybody have any questions about my life or anything that like how I like Oregon, or if it rains a lot? I know I get that question a lot. So, in any case, I did want to say, please interrupt if you have questions. I know that there's several of you that I've met that have been a part of the peer review, or maybe you've been reviewed. I think there's a couple of people that fall into that category. If you have something you want to add, please do. This material kind of lends itself to me explaining a lot of it, so I don't just want to talk to you the entire time. I'd love to break it up. So any little thing that you're thinking, and of course that goes for the state folks here too, but again, just feel free to interrupt, feel free to let us know about anything that you're thinking about while we're going through the materials. If something doesn't make sense, definitely interrupt us, and we're happy to have that discussion. So, and with that said, I think we'll go ahead and get started. No questions at all, right? You guys looked really interested when I said that I had a nightmare scenario that people would fall asleep at that point, so that's really good. All right, so everybody's got the binders, correct? So you can follow along up here. You can follow along, within your book as well. That's fine. Either way is good. So the very first page is just going to be your table of contents. This is mostly just for reference for you. I know for me personally, I would probably just make a few notes on this once we're going through some of these forms, so you can kind of use it as somewhat of a bibliography or just a good reference point. You can it's probably good to make notes within the sheets themselves, like on the actual documents, but I think this one is also good to kind of note, like, make sure you print this one out before you come. So we won't go over any of this information because it's just going to be all the documents that we're going through coming up here. Same with the overview. I'm not gonna review too much of this. This is a lot of what Amy just discussed. What we're doing here, why we're doing this. I see this as something to remind you of what we're doing here and why we're here today, and what we're doing going forward. And then also for any courts, any team members, this seems like a really good document to provide to people if they're unsure of what you're doing there. I've done so many of these site visits, I've done so many peer reviews, people are always still a little bit nervous, a little bit hesitant, even though you've tried to cover all your bases and talk about what you're doing. So I think this would be also a really good sheet to print out or provide to people or send to maybe the team members you haven't talked with directly if they're kind of concerned about what's going on, just so they know it's all on the up and up and that everything is for a good reason. And I really like I think it's somewhere in the second paragraph, but there's a piece about this being collaborative. This whole thing is about being helpful. It's about providing suggestions and not auditing, not going in and finding out what's wrong and reporting that back to the state and having trouble going on that kind of way. It's about trying to be helpful, and I think what we've learned so far with all these other states is that you guys as the peer reviewers are getting as much, if not maybe a little bit more, out of this whole process because so many of the peer reviewers have never actually seen another drug court. It's just go, go, go all the time within your programs, and you just don't ever get a chance to take a breath. So I think this is a really good opportunity for peer reviewers, and I think they really learn a lot, like I said, even maybe more so than the site being visited. So again, this is just kind of an FYI, and make sure that if you want to look at the general overview and talk about it kind of generally with teams, this is a good reference too. Okay, the checklist. Now we're getting into a little more of the details here. So I'm not going to go over each one of these as well, but again, this is just a very general way of kind of seeing, a quick and dirty way of seeing what you guys are going to be doing. It's going to be contacting the site. It's going to be having them fill out some information, some assessment information. You're going to get some information from them. You're going to talk about site visit dates and that type of thing. It's, of course, the interviews are going to occur, the observations, and the focus group. Your three biggest tasks are going to be that: interviews, focus group, observations. There's going to be a lot of other little things that are going to go on while that's happening, but those are your big three right there, are those tasks, and that's what we're going to really focus on today, making sure that goes, try to go as seamless as you can whenever that happens. So again, this is just kind of something for you to look at and reference after the fact. I don't want to read through this and bore everybody here. And then I guess towards the end is also about the final product, the report, and the feedback you're going to provide to them. But again, we'll get on into all of this in greater detail. So document C, this is where we're finally going to start to actually dive into this a little bit more. Now, I believe that this is still where you guys stand as far as wanting to have at least a judge and a coordinator always. Are you guys adding anybody else to that list, or has that changed? Or?
No, we do it on kind of a case-by-case basis so far, but it's really important to us that we are matching the peer reviewers with the needs of the court. So we spend some time with the court that's asking
So we make sure to have a conference call with each program that wants to go through the peer review process to make sure that we understand what their needs are and what they're looking for. And then we've also created a catalog, or I should say Kyle created a catalog, and that's essentially, we call it the dating profile. And but we wanted to understand the roles of each of our peer reviewers, where they see where their expertise lies, so that then we can do that matching process. So it's really the most benefit for the peer reviewer as well as the court program. And so sometimes we actually have 3 plus someone from our office, and that third person is, it might be a treatment provider, it might be a public defender, it might be a prosecutor.
Gotcha. And actually, I meant to do one other thing before I got started. Can you raise your hand if you're a judge in the room here? And then do we have defense attorneys? Any prosecuting attorneys? Prosecutors? Treatment providers? Probation? And then law enforcement? Am I forgetting anybody? Did I miss anybody? Oh, coordinators, yes. Are there any coordinators in the house? Yes. There we go. Gotcha. Okay. Just wanted to kind of get a sense of that, to see who we were talking with.
Add in there that when we take our first break, Kyle will be handing out your dating profile. So you will get to fill out your own sheet that we will include in our database as well. So you'll get to do that. And again, as Brenedy referenced, all of that does is let us know what you feel your own areas of expertise, past and current experience are, so that we can match you up as best as possible with what the court being reviewed is hoping to gain out of the process.
Dating profiles, this is exciting. I really like that idea. I want to use that term. I think I love the idea and I love the term. You can't miss that. So, and just so I was clear, you said that everybody here is voluntarily here. Like, you guys read about this and are just interested. Is that correct? Do I have that right? Is there anybody here against their will? I mean, I'll tell them to look away if that's the case. But I saw a half a hand over that direction. I think I just wanted to say about that too. That's fantastic. That is a little bit different than what we've seen in the other states that we've been working with so far. People are getting I think they're getting volunteered or voluntold. I don't know if anybody's ever heard that, but they're getting voluntold a little bit more, and I think that's having somewhat of an effect on the peer review process overall. The fact that you guys have the motivation and the interest to be here, I think, is going to make such a big difference, and I hope that this takes off like it's planned, because you guys would be a great model, and we could look to it, point the other states and others who are interested. We've been working with about 6 across the country, 7 or so, I can't remember now, but we have a lot of people. We've had to actually kind of put them off because we have so many other states interested. We just don't have the time yet. But a lot of states are interested in this. I think, because of the fact that you can learn and they like the idea of it, but also it's just so cost effective. It's just a really, really easy, simple, cheap way to kind of get some information from folks. So that's great that you're all here, and I can tell you're all ready to get your peer review on, right? Like, your excitement I can just feel it while I'm up here. I like that. So back to our task detail sheet here. So I guess I might call on you guys here again. The first step in the process is, I'm not sure, I guess, are you guys having the team, and like you said, you've identified teams who want to get reviewed, but I guess maybe if you want to.
Yeah, so how that process works is, again, we're letting it be known statewide that we have this process available, and courts voluntarily contact myself, Brenedy, Kyle, or Sierra to indicate they're interested. We'll schedule a brief conference call with at least the judge and the coordinator for the program. Oftentimes, the full team is involved in that conference call just to learn a little bit more about why they're interested in the process, what's one thing they hope to gain from the process, are there specific roles that they would love expertise from, specific topics. Then we go through our catalog of reviewers, and one of us will reach out to you, any number of you as reviewers, and we're making sure that you are a part of the same court type as the court being reviewed. We do try to take into account rural versus urban jurisdictions and make sure that reviewers are on the same page there. And then again, any special expertise or roles involved, there will be a minimum of a judge and a coordinator, and oftentimes a third reviewer with, again, that specific expertise. And then at least one of us from our team at the State Court Administrator's Office is also involved. At that point, we will send out an email once we have confirmation that all of the reviewers we've reached out to, they're on board, they're ready to do this. The court that's being reviewed will receive an email that will include you reviewers who have agreed to participate, and it will have a number of these initial documents that we're looking at attached. So it will include the initial brief one-pager that explains the process, and that's so that the judge and coordinator for the court being reviewed can share that information with the rest of the team, make sure they're aware that this is a voluntary process, it's not used to identify deficits, it's not used as any part of an audit, it's not being tied to funding, and share that with the team. We include the checklist, a couple of pages that Adrian will reference here in a minute, and then we start the scheduling process. We do acknowledge, and Adrian, I'm sure you'll talk about this a little more, that that can be the most time-consuming part of the process, is getting everybody's schedules on board. So we identify some court docket dates and then begin that. Here in Colorado, we're finding that the actual site visit is being scheduled out about 4 to 6 months from the time that I send out that initial email, just because that's how much time it takes for everybody's schedules to line up. And that's okay. It gives a lot of time for everybody to prep and do the behind the scenes work. And then I also get the court being reviewed set up with their best assessment. So I know you'll go into that.
So I'm glad you touched on it. I can't stress enough how much when you talk to the courts, especially at the first contact, but even during the follow-up and on through the peer review itself, to make sure that not only are you saying that this is a helpful, collaborative process where you are trying to find information out to help them out ultimately, not this look for deficits and look for trouble kind of issue. Physically saying that, but also making sure that the way you're coming across to people, the way you're asking questions, the way you're talking with them when you talk with them on the phone, once you're there in person, keeping that up as much as possible. I can't tell you how much I do that on my process evaluations. I just tell people, we're not there to get you freaked out. We're not here for an audit. We're not doing this. And I tell them that 4 or 5 times over the phone. We do it by email. I show up and I ask, so do you know why you're here for this interview? Hey, I heard it's an audit or something like that. And people kind of have in their head what is going to happen, and they're just a little bit nervous about somebody coming into their space, I think, sometimes. But it's really, really important to remember that. Just think about, if you've been reviewed or if you haven't been, what it would feel like and what you're kind of thinking if people are coming in and trying to pick apart certain things. So I can't stress that enough, that is just highly important to keep initially and throughout. And I mention that because the first thing, after what Amy described, the first thing you're going to do is contact the coordinator at the site. That's going to be your very first contact and the first thing you're going to do. And I'm going to jump around I think it's one document ahead to it is just one document ahead. So this cover page, I am a phone person. I like to talk to people. I like to get through the details and figure out the nuances, because every program is so different. People have so many things going on. Probation officers have completely different duties in all different kinds of programs. Treatment providers sometimes are heavily involved and are the backbone of the program. Other times they don't come to staffing or court. So I just like to really get a sense of that over the phone. Feel free to use this by email and send it to somebody. I don't know if you guys have a preference either way, but just in my own experience, I really like to talk with people and kind of go through this information. And some of it may seem very rudimentary. Some of it seems like you don't really need it or you would already have it. I would still ask. The name of the program is a really tricky one. You'll get to the report writing phase and you won't even know what the name of the, you can't remember if it's, Charles County or if it's, something else. So I think, making sure you get that kind of stuff. Mailing address, physical address. I can't tell you How many times I've almost showed up to the mailing address when I've done site visits, because that's just the thing that the coordinator provides always. Making sure, okay, that's your address. Is that where you are physically located? Oh, no. I mean, you would assume people would know to not send you to their mailbox, but you don't want to assume anything with this. The date of the site visit, of course, you're going to have to leave blank for now because that's to be decided. Again, just a little bit of information as far as special info regarding directions, if there's construction or if it's located downtown, if there's issues like that. That's just a space to note that. This intake information is just kind of FYI. It's not going to necessarily affect anything while you're getting stuff planned. The next several things. The program began, active participants, county population, and then their key demographics. Really, really good to get a background of the program, because that will give you an instant sense of how similar or dissimilar they are to your program. Chances are most of these will probably be, they're going to be several years older or newer. Their population of the county may be, a few 100,000 less than you're used to. So that just gives you a real good idea of what they're working with and what their resources may be, and just kind of some of the tricky issues they may run into. So that's really good stuff to have. The day and time of the staffing in court, that's the key here. That's the key. That's why I always love to call people too, is to get a sense of, sometimes people will put, we have Thursdays at 8 a.m. when it turns out it's Thursdays at 8:40-ish. Sometimes it's 8:10, and it's kind of fluid. So you can kind of get that on the phone. If you send this to somebody and they just put it on paper, you may count it as something, you may set it in stone and think that that's the way it's going to be. But again, getting that information, so that's where you're going to start with, looking at where their staffing and court session is, and that's when you're going to start to look at your potential dates. And what I would do when you're talking with your peer reviewers, so if they're Thursdays at 8 a.m., you're going to talk about probably going Wednesday, Thursday. I would get multiple days. If they look at May 8th and also look at May 20th, if that's possible. Have backup dates. There's a lot of people, and like she said, the hardest part, I think, of all of this is just getting it on the calendar. You got so many people. You want to make sure they're all available. So I would definitely make a note of that to say, okay, we're gonna all shoot for all the peer reviewers are available May 20th. Have a couple backups. It's a very decent chance that it's not going to work out for that court. The judge may be in training, whatever. So just to save yourself a little time, have some extra dates there. Where should the interviews be held? So important for me. You do not want to be moving around. You want to be, ideally, in some kind of a room, a conference room, with a table, with a plug-in. If you're going to bring a laptop, it's going to be key. You're not going to be able to take anything otherwise. And getting the coordinator, when you talk to them, to commit to that. Is it a conference room? If they say, yeah, we have attorney rooms, it'll be fine. If you use an attorney room, you can't, a lot of times you can't, set that aside for an entire day. You go away for lunch, you step out for a minute, an attorney goes in there, it's going to throw everything off. Also, make sure you're not in a room that's shared with others. Don't share offices if they have cubicles or something like that. It can be done, but I've never done that. I've always insisted that we have a closed door so that people feel like they can talk openly, that they have their privacy, and that we're going to protect their confidentiality and what they say, because there may be some tricky issues going on there. So make sure that you talk with them about specifics, where it's going to be at, how long you can have it, what's the setup in there. I don't know if people are going to be using laptops or hand written notes, but again, I always use a laptop, so I can't really type in my lap, and I will need a plug-in at some point. So these little things like this will really trip you up once you get there if you have to adjust. It's okay if you need to do a few interviews every so often. If the judge wants you to meet in their chambers and it's in the courthouse and you're going to be in the courthouse all day anyway, that'll work. If you need to go across the street to probation, a few blocks down to treatment, come back to the courthouse, go down to the probation office again, it's going to be crazy for you. You don't want to account for weather. You don't want to have all your stuff. Drop that. I've done that before. It's not very productive. The logistics just make it very hard to get good information because you're just worried about your timing. You're running late. It just makes everything so much more complicated. So again, can't stress enough to try to get them to commit to you being parked in an area for the 2-3 days, whatever you're going to be there. Where to stay? Suggestions where to stay. we've all been, I think we've all gone online and booked something that looked really decent online, and we got there, and it wasn't quite what the pictures matched up, and then you go back and look and you see it was dated like 2009 or something, and it's good to ask people that. It may seem straightforward enough, especially if you're going to a rural jurisdiction. I mean, the closest hotel may be 20, 30 minutes away, but definitely get suggestions. They can tell you areas to avoid, and I've been very thankful that I've done that with everybody I've talked to, because I've avoided some very, we went to Minnesota, way up in Minnesota towards Canada, and it looked like a hotel online, and we drove by it, and it was somebody's house. I mean, it just looked like a really old, broken down house, and apparently they have people stay there, so we almost went there. So I just don't want anybody to run into that kind of thing. Same thing about suggestions to eat. This is just kind of nice, because if you go somewhere different, it's nice to check out good places. But I think we have either, I think all of us have probably traveled and been sick. It's not fun, so you don't want to go to that nice mom and pop place if it's really not the greatest place in the world. I'm sure we've all known somebody who's traveled and had like food poisoning or something too. So it's just, again, these are all things that behoove you to talk about, and just make sure that somebody's at least weighing in who lives there and can vouch for it. Absolutely. Yeah, I like that. See, I love that.
I don't know if it requires a microphone, or if it needs to be recorded, but we do have a budget, so we pay for all of the travel. So if we need to book your hotel room, we can do that, or we can also reimburse it. So as a volunteer peer reviewer, we don't expect you to incur any of that cost on yourself. So we'll pay food, travel, hotel expenses.
Where to park your vehicles. Like, again, you're going to a small jurisdiction, they have a small town square, fine. Most of the time, you're going to have issues with parking, and you need to know whether it's going to be 2-hour parking, and you need to feed the meter. Ideally, go and park and sit all day. You don't want to have to go in and out. You're going to forget about it. You're going to be busy. Again, these are kind of minor things, but it's going to make a big, big difference. If your first interview isn't until 9 a.m. and the lot's full by 8:30, you need to account for that. You might need to get there a little bit early and maybe have a debrief, or start up a little with something different. But make sure you get that information from them, and press people for that. If you get this back, if you email this and it's blank, ask about it. Still check with them. They may not think much of it because they're there every day. Ask them about it. That's why, again, I like to be on the phone and talk with people about it. Items not allowed. I still go to courthouses that don't allow cell phones. I still run into frequently not being able to have laptops. Food and drink is a big one too. So just, again, make sure that you run that by some people. You'd be surprised how much some things are restricted in certain areas. So, and then primary concerns are just anything else that's going on with them. Next two questions really. Maybe they have a judge transition coming up. Maybe one of the judges is retiring, or treatment provider they just changed. It's just a catch-all for anything major going on with you guys. And then this section, I don't know if you necessarily need to do this over the phone. I think this part you can send to them, just because of the time that it would take to get every phone number, email. I don't know about you guys, but when I ran my program, I had my team member contact list updated every single minute of every day. So if you prompt somebody for that, the coordinator typically will have that and shoot it to you, and you can fill this out yourself, or they'll do it. But again, I don't know if you necessarily have to talk about this over the phone. And again, it's each person's choice whether they want to talk about it on the phone or send it to them, and then maybe have some follow-up or back and forth. Either way, whatever you're most comfortable with. So, I'm going to jump back and forth just a tiny bit here. So you're going to get that cover page here. You'll get that returned. One other thing, this is a good one to point out. Is there anybody else on the team? You're going to have your 6, 7 traditional team members, the people you're usually looking for. Is there anybody else who's involved? Does the probation department supervisor, do they want, are they heavily involved? Do they supervise 6 or 7 POs on a big program, and so they have to be there daily, checking in, seeing what they're doing? They're going to want to be interviewed. I've been to site visits where we didn't ask that question, and the person wasn't upset, but they are a little bothered. They think, well, why aren't they trying to talk to me? They're very invested. They may not be on the ground floor as far as the drug court every single day, but they are very much invested and very much involved. So talk about that. The court administrator is a big one that we see. Again, department heads, any kind of law enforcement person who's maybe on the just kind of comes and goes here and there. They're job and employment people. That's a big one too. Anybody who's helping with job training or somebody who volunteers their time, donates their time. Get those folks, see if they want to be interviewed. And if they do, interview them. Absolutely interview them. If they want to, if they're okay, they only show up or they provide some services and they're fine, that's whatever. But a lot of people are invested in these programs and they want to give their perspective. Let's see. So as Amy was talking about, it looks like it's, at least 3 days, or I'm sorry, at least 30 days out is probably, pretty, I think that's shooting for the moon there. But however long it takes, it's going to take a few months. It's hard to get 10, 15 people schedule all to get up really nicely. And actually, before I go forward, I want to mention too, if there's anybody on site that, if you have most of the team available, if everybody but the treatment provider is going to be available, I would say that you could still go through with that peer review. If you're missing 2, 3, 4, half the team, I would say it's not really worth going for, because we offer the phone conference or the phone call interview, but I see that more as a last resort as opposed to as an option A and B. You want to talk to people in person. You're going to get the best information when you see them in person, and they're going to be much more, I think, forward and honest and open with you once they kind of see what you're about and how everything's going. So again, 1, maybe 2 people are gone. I think that's pretty decent, especially if you're looking into, if you were scheduling now and they weren't available till December and there's a couple people gone, go for it. If that's the best that you're going to do, that's great. But I wouldn't recommend trying to follow up with people by phone call after the fact. It's going to add more time. It's going to add a lot more time to your, it's going to put a lot more on your plate just because you're going to have to individually schedule people still. So make sure that you can get as many people as possible when you're in site.
And Adrian, I
yes.
don't know if this might be a good place, so tell me if it's not, but I'm wondering, we just had 2 people go on a peer review, and I'm wondering if you, Sarah and Judge Green, would be willing to kind of talk about that beginning process, anything you noticed, maybe something that we could have done differently or something that worked really well?
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm from the 8th. I'm the coordinator for Fort Collins DUI Court. And I think what they said were, Brenedy and Amy emailed myself and Judge Green to find out if this would work. And then we just got in contact with the 5th, where we were reviewing their DUI court. And I think one thing that we did that was really helpful was a doodle poll for dates. And I think we were shooting for February originally, but I can't remember when you guys sent us the email, November or October, but it wound up being April. So just kind of planning on it's going to take a while to get this set up. That was my main thought, but it gave us a lot of time to get all of this in place. So when we got there, we already had the best assessment, we already had the site prep form, and we were just, we felt pretty, we didn't feel too stressed on time before the site visit.
My name is Brian Green, judge in Fair Play. I run a DUI court, so I was in the peer review program with the Leadville group. I want to reiterate what Adrian was saying. The little details are super helpful. The hotels, the restaurants. You just don't want to be wasting your time on those details. We did 2 phone interviews, and they were okay, but I definitely echo that the in-person interviews are better.
Listen to that man. He's a smart guy there. Anybody who agrees with me, really. So, no, I think that was great. Feel free to do that anytime here. I know one big thing, too, is the amount of time. People see 2, 3 days, and they're not super crazy about it, and I get it. I can't stress enough, don't try to jam everything into a day. Don't try to do a 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. You will be completely wiped out before half the day is over. You won't recall anything, and you will be too tired to do anything following that. The 2 days are going to be, I think, where you should shoot for. And I think the majority of the peer reviews can be done. I think a lot of them will be a day and a half to close to 2 days. So I don't know if you guys have had any 3-day visits. I don't know if that's absolutely necessary. I think that's more for, if that's an enormous program, I don't even know if you have one that big out here, but that would be for a really gigantic program who has maybe 14 team members because they have 4 POs and 5 different treatment providers type of thing. But 2 days, it can be done, and it's so much better that way. You have chances to debrief, the day, in between days. And again, I think for what it's going to do for what you need to do for most of these programs, it can be done in about 2 days, and it probably will be a tiny bit less. You might get done, say, at 2, 3 o'clock on your second day. And was that your experience? Did you guys have about 2 days as well? So don't be freaked out by the 3 days. I think people see 3 and just, oh my God, I don't want to take that much off. But 2 seems somewhat more reasonable. And then the blocking out the half day once you return. I know it's easier said than done, but I'm a procrastinator too. I totally am. But if you get yourself to do it when you get back, you can knock it out very quickly. It does not. You'll see the summary report. It looks kind of long. People, again, I think get a little bit nervous when they see it. It's not nearly as involved or detailed as the stuff I was talking about earlier, what I do. It's not going to be a 15-page report that you write from scratch. It's going to be some very simple information. It's going to be some copy pasting, and then also adding in your 2 cents, adding in your impressions, your opinions, just kind of here and there. So take that extra half day, really try to get into the report and get that done, and then move on from that. Can't stress that enough. So you're obviously going to know once you talk with them or get the sheet completed when the staffings will take place. And again, here's the interviews. Just make sure that you have a dedicated space. That's really, really important. I think one thing I always do too is when I send, and we'll go to this, I guess we'll go ahead and show this. I'm going to skip ahead to, it's going to be a few ahead. It's document H here. So you're going to send this to the coordinator to get people signed up once you have your day picked, once you have a date set. What I recommend and what I have always done, and it's always been great to do, is have the coordinator take it to the judge first. The judge's schedule typically is the trickiest one to get, and their time is spoken for quite a bit, so giving them whatever option number 1 is usually what I direct people to do. If a judge, I've also had it where a judge actually only has lunchtime to actually meet, so you may have to move your lunch to 11 or 1, or push it back if it starts at 12:30 or whatever. But be flexible. Be aware of that. Don't skip lunch. I'm not saying that. Nobody wants that. But be aware that may happen. That's a decent possibility. The other thing I also do when I send this is I tell the coordinator I would love to talk with them first or as soon as possible. If the judge is the first person, fine. They're typically not. But I want to usually talk to the coordinator first. They really set the tone for what you're looking for. They can talk about the different team members. They can talk about general dynamics, general issues going on. They have their hands and their fingerprints all over the program. I would really, really highly suggest that you start there if possible. It may not always be, but I get them on as soon as possible. I would not wait until the second day. There's such a wealth of information for what they do that I find that they're just really key to talk with first. Otherwise, once they do that, the best thing to do is to take this to staffing. The coordinator take this to staffing and have everybody do a round robin and just go for it. I think there's other options. You could try to contact folks, or they may try to figure out other ways, but what I would suggest to them is taking it to staffing. Everybody has their schedules typically right in front of them. Everybody can kind of work out, oh, can I have that 2 o'clock? And it's great, and it goes so seamlessly. I'd say almost 100% of the time that's how people do it. If they go a different route, that's fine, as long as the schedule comes out good. And again, make sure that you know who should be on here. You should know who you should be talking to before you get this back so you can see if anybody's missing. And you're going to need to adjust this, of course, as once you get that back. Sometimes people just type in first, last name, and maybe really probably that's about it. So I sometimes will follow up and ask what role that person is in, because I want to know if we typically might have a judge interview another judge. So you want to just make sure that you have some details like that, and that's why we say team member name and agency. I also just like to clean this up too, because this document's not super great when you're actually typing into it. So I'll redo it, type it up. I'll note things. Say we're meeting in the judge's chambers, I'll put that on the line as well. Meet in judge's chambers for this interview. Those kind of things. It's just really nice reminders because it'll be crazy. Yes. Great question. What I would say is get a sense from the coordinator. What you ideally would like to do is have individual interviews. But I have had circumstances where there are 3 or 4 POs, and there's a couple of options. You can do a group interview if they're comfortable with it. You want to make sure you tell them that confidentiality is obviously not going to be the same since there's other people sitting in there. If they really want to be able to speak their minds, they're maybe going to have to hold back when they're in that group interview. But if they're okay with that, and what I've found when I've done it is they don't care. They're usually all, they've said what they've said before, and it's nothing new at all. So if they're okay with it, I think it's great. Otherwise, they can also nominate somebody. Say there's a lead PO or someone who is always at staffing or kind of the go-to designated PO. And if the others are comfortable with that person speaking for them on their behalf, giving the information, that's great too. And I think, you're going to probably run into that sometimes, especially if you have a 2-day window and, you got long staffing or court sessions that'll eat into some of the days. You definitely could run into that. So it's really up to the site and just gauging them. And I think what I would do is just offer basically like what I said and see what they come back with. If they are insistent that all 4 POs need to be interviewed or want to be interviewed, try to make it work in your schedule. But if you only have X amount of time slots, then you can tell them, well, we have 3 available, and we'll just, we'll have to see, who's going to be able to do it in person, and then maybe do some follow-up interviews. So, again, there's not one clear answer. I think it's just a little bit of everything, and it's really up to them what they're comfortable with. But there's a decent chance you'll run into that. So, it's a good question. And that'll go same for treatment, and you run for that for treatment and probation quite a bit. Okay, so go back to our task details. This is one thing we kind of throw in there with trying to have the debrief after court. If you want to have a quick debrief with the team when you're still on site. What I've found is teams, you have everybody coming into your space and they're asking all these questions and poking around, so they kind of want immediate feedback. They're not expecting, I think, the whole thing, but I think they kind of feel like, well, what are we doing this for? We should be getting something. So this suggestion is just to try to shoot for the debrief after the court session. If they have court on Monday morning at 8 a.m., you can't do the debrief after. You haven't even done anything yet. So that's going to be dictated just strictly by what the court schedules are going to be. But if it can work out, I would definitely suggest that. Basically, any court or staffing day that's not a Monday, I think you can get that debrief in there. Because again, you want to do it as close to the end of your visit as you can. So this is, again, the same kind of thing. This is just making sure that you set up the time for the exit interview or debrief with the coordinator or the team. The pilot visit that I went on, a lot of the team members were in court or had to go meet with people, so I think there was maybe 3 out of the 7 team members there, and they were okay with that. I think it's up to each site. I think it's also just going to be dictated by their schedule. Some people won't mind, and some people will definitely want to be there. But whoever's available is what you should go with. Oh yeah, and then bring in food. People tend to show up when you have food and lunch, I guess. That's what I've heard, at least. This is very key, the focus group. You really need to have, as important as the interview room is, the focus group room is doubly important. The participants are talking about the team members that are just outside their door or right down the hall or wherever it may be. So you need to make sure that they feel comfortable when you're talking with them. It needs to be behind a closed door. Team members do not need to be in there. You need to make sure that you can confirm all of this information prior to your visit. Make sure that is all set and ready to go, because nothing will throw your focus group off more than thinking that somebody can hear, or sharing the room with somebody, or somebody coming in and asking some general questions or something. It really throws that vibe off. They are there to talk with you as independent people, and that is it. So again, make sure that is firmed up. Don't, if they're, oh, we got a room somewhere in the back, get specific. Make sure it's private. Make sure it's going to hold everybody. They don't need to have desks. You can sit around in chairs. It doesn't really matter, because they're just mostly going to be talking. But we'll get into that a little bit later. We're going to go over some more detailed focus group stuff. With the focus group or with the team member interviews? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's going to be part of the, we're going to have a sheet that you go over, and it'll discuss some of that. It'll talk about, because they're taking part in it, you have to tell them about the risk and the benefits, just some standard things. So absolutely, that would be covered, and that's key to emphasize that for them, because they're, I think you guys know this, participants don't see you as some independent person. You're the team, you're them, like we're us and you're them. And so when they first come in, you really need to be sensitive to that and try to break through that. And I've done, I don't know, a few dozen focus groups. I've never had one where they didn't eventually open up. It might take a few minutes. It takes, 10, 15, maybe. I've never had it take very long. The participants, once somebody kind of says something, I think they get comfortable, and then boom, you get great information from them. So. And then here's just, again, just a few reminders that we already went over with that cover sheet about the hotels and location. And then once you're at the end of the visit, you're going to want to do the follow-up call, but I think we'll save that for a little bit later. So the link to the online assessment, that's going to be about a month prior to the visit. Is that correct? I don't know if there's anything you guys want to talk about as far as the...
Sending that link out as soon as we have the initial telephone call.
Okay.
So this is the assessment that the court being reviewed completes amongst their team.
And it's document E. You guys don't have to look at it, but this is just it. Here, sorry.
So I will actually email Shannon. She'll give the identified person for the court being reviewed, usually the coordinator, a login ID and password so that they can begin working on that with their team.
And for the team, I guess some of you have probably seen this, but this is what the team's going to fill out. It looks really long. It's 38 pages, and it looks like there's just a million questions. A lot of it is, I'd say the majority of it is things that people know off the top of their head, things they can answer about their program in their sleep. The few that are kind of tricky are stuff like this, these statistics. What percentage of people are poly users? What's your drug of choice and how much? But again, a lot of these are, do you take felons? Do you take people who use Suboxone? What time is your court staffing? How long does it last? How many people have ever graduated from the program? Who's on the team? Who comes to staffing? Who comes to court? Those kind. Do you have a policy committee? Really quick, answers that everybody, again, if you work with a program even for a few months, that you would know right off the bat. So if they see this or they freak out or they're not crazy about doing this crazy long assessment, assure them that, again, I'd say at least 70-80% of this is going to be just things that are again, things you'll know in your sleep. So it will take a little bit of time for some of the statistics, but I think, I'm not sure, I don't want them to have them run reports and spend days trying to find out if it's 26% or 27% that use alcohol. I don't, that we're not trying to get that detailed with it. If it's 25% between these four, because it's about a quarter each, that sounds great. I think is that fair enough? Or I hate to speak for you guys there.
No, I think that's very fair. And the other thing I want to mention is this is actually now online. And so for the newer courts going through, this used to just be basically a PDF and a paper tool. And so you would print it out, you would fill it out, you would scan it back in, send it back to us. But now that it's an online tool, it can actually save your assessment results. And so as we kind of see this grow over time, you'll be able to go back and see an assessment from 3 years ago, 6 years ago, and see how your program has changed and what the report looks like, how that has changed as well. And I think that can be a really valuable tool for our programs.
Absolutely.
And I would just add also to this, we really want to encourage, and we'll do this on our end, but if you as reviewers can also encourage that this be completed as a team. You may run into situations where we recently had a review where, logistics just don't work out, and you find that oftentimes the coordinator or one or two members of the team completed this prior to the site visit. If that happens, then you as reviewers will want to, what happened in this recent review, the reviewers were able to provide paper copies of the completed best assessment to the individuals when they came in for their individual interviews, and gave them a few minutes to kind of look through the results and see if anything stood out. But this flows much, much better if the court being reviewed completes this as a team together. And again, if this looks too daunting to complete all at once, we have suggested just digestible pieces. So maybe they take 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning or end of their staffing until it's completed. So there are different ways that we've suggested that.
And are you guys sending this treatment definitions, or is that on the peer reviewers to provide to the team? This is for question 3.6 in the survey. It's just got some information about which types of treatment are provided to participants and whether it's required or offered or whatever. And so this document, I think it's F, just gives more detail so that we find that treatment providers actually run into a lot of questions with this, and also just coordinators in general. So it provides a little more detail about what the actual treatment modality is, and then some links to the information in case they're not sure exactly which types they're using. So do you know how they receive that?
I don't, and I might reach out to anybody in the room who has been a reviewer. I can tell you that I did not, for our most recent one, send this out, so that'll be something that I add to my list for the next ones. I don't believe this was one I sent out, but...
Well, and it's more of an FYI. Again, most treatment providers see this and can see the options and can make sense of it, but again, we've run into it just enough that we wanted to provide those definitions with folks. So we'll make sure that that's included. And then setting the date for the survey and kind of prompting folks for the completion of the survey, is that also with SCAO, or is that with the peer reviewers to remind the site to get that done? Is that who's doing the... Or
We've been encouraging that, but I think that can be a joint process.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So about a month prior, again, if you don't have that cover page, or you don't have all the information on that cover page, again, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I would not really be ready to go on the visit. I think you have to have all that information to have it, to be ready to go. So if you haven't received it, or there's a lot of missing information from it, if there's a couple missing things, if they're not sure if one person is going to be at the interview or the other, that kind of loose end can be tied up once you get there. But if the majority of it is not happening, then you absolutely need to have that. And then, of course, your travel arrangements will be made, and reminders for the survey, make sure that's completed. And then Amy also talked about how, I guess, did you just kind of speak about how they received the survey, and then the best practices table as well? Are you guys are providing that, or we are, or I guess it's spitting it out and they just get it, right?
Yeah. So once it's completed online, it should spit out the results, and then we're asking the coordinator for the site being reviewed to then email that out to the reviewers and ourselves.
Okay.
And
do you guys have access to it if they don't do that?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So somebody can, either way, hopefully they do it, but...
And ideally, and this happened with the most recent one and seemed to work well, where the coordinator also sent it out to their team. So that was helpful for the team to have in advance.
And teams really like to see that. It's really great to have something instant and show you at least a little bit of preliminary feedback. And we'll show you one of those tables a little bit, coming up here in a little bit. So if there's anything else that you need to clarify, I mean, if there's something egregious or really stands out in the survey or the best practices table, you can contact the court before you arrive. But if there's just questions, general questions that you have, like, did you ever have law enforcement? Is the judge's term indefinite, or does it rotate? Those are kinds of things that you want to just do on site. I mean, that's the whole point of what you're doing with this peer review. So don't get caught up on those kind of things. The clarifications, I think, are just, say if half of it's missing, that's probably when you want to call and say, was there a technical issue, or did you just skip it, and are you not wanting us to show up now, that kind of thing. So, and then you see this reminder throughout, and I keep harping on it for a reason. It's important to make sure you keep reiterating that it's not about punishment and not about finding what's going on, and that the deficits and reporting and telling on folks, that kind of thing. You can't say it enough. So at least a week. I'm not sure if you guys have that timeline still, but at least before you go on the peer review, you have to do this. And it may not necessarily be an hour. You may be able to do a lot of it over email, but talk to each other and figure out who's going to lead the interviews. Ideally, you should probably rotate that. What we have found is that the role-to-role interviews really work well, judges interviewing judges. Because again, that's where you're really going to start to learn so much as being the reviewer. because you're going to ask the general questions, and then things are going to pop into your head. You're going to think about all the things that you run into with your program when they say certain things. So we really do encourage that, but that's not required. The biggest thing to remember is to talk about and decide who's going to actually do it. If the judge is going to do all the interviews, fine. But I again would encourage that to be split up by role. And if you don't have, say, a treatment provider, that's important to talk about. If there's a judge, coordinator, and a probation officer, and you have a treatment provider, who's going to talk to them? Who's going to be most comfortable with that? Who wants to do that? But have that decided. Make sure that that is decided and that is agreed upon too. Because there's nothing. Our very first peer review, we added this in after the pilot in Georgia because we got to the interview and the person sat down and we all just kind of looked at each other for a second. And luckily I've done that enough that I just kind of jumped in. And then the interviewee didn't have any idea, but after they left, we were like, we probably should have talked about that before we talked to this person. So you'll run into that if you don't, again, cover the little details and make things seamless as you can. Who's going to lead the focus group? This is probably the most informative, and I think the part that people enjoy the most of this peer review. It's one of the shortest things. It's only an hour or so. People love to do this focus group, so you may have to fight it out. The judge may have to throw rank down and say, I'm doing it, but whatever you guys decide, just make sure that that's agreed upon. But the focus group is very interesting. We've seen treatment providers do it. They're used to obviously leading groups and talking, in a group setting, having those discussions. Sometimes the judges just really like the idea of it, and I think that since they aren't able to ask a lot of questions sometimes of their own participants, that this is a great opportunity to kind of just really see what these people have to say. Note taking, that's key. It's not going to be the most glamorous job, but it needs to be done. You need to figure out who's going to be taking notes and how they're going to be taking them. If all of you are taking paper notes, handwritten notes, and all of you have sloppy handwriting and you haven't talked about who's going to put all the notes together, you're not going to have much once you get back. I never do handwritten just because if I need to share them, I know I can barely read my own writing. So think about that. If you're somebody who likes to put pen to paper, that's great, but make sure that you consider how you're going to share those notes and whether you're going to be able to provide that to the team and if it's going to be useful for them. Ideally, you all have you actually have electronics. I don't know if you can use a tablet or anything, but I would definitely suggest a laptop and having that electronic documentation, and then making sure that you nominate or, again, decide who's going to pull all this together. You may not actually have to copy and paste it all into one big document. It depends on kind of what each person wants to do, but somebody needs to be in charge of looking at that and putting that all together and looking at what you guys gained and remembering all the different things you talked about with the teams.
The only caveat I would say is just be sensitive to who your audience is when you have your laptop out in front of you.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so, if it could be a barrier, don't use your laptop. So I actually mostly do handwritten that I then type, which it does take more time. But with the screen in front of you, particularly with the focus groups, I think that can be problematic. So I would say use your good judgment and your discretion when you're going into the interviews with the focus group.
No, that's a good point. Every interview I do, every focus group, I always tell people, I'm sorry, I'm using a laptop, I'm not ignoring you. I'm not trying to avoid eye contact. Because of that, I think people, just sometimes people feel a little, put off by it. So absolutely, that's something to consider. And with the focus group too, I think that's why you want to have at least two, possibly three people there. What we typically do is we have somebody leading the group, facilitating the discussion, so they're the kind of focal point, and then our note takers are off to the side, and it's still warning them, hey, our people are taking notes, but they're not putting your names down, we're not quoting anybody, we're making sure they know this is just for our own documentation internally, and that's it. So, but very good point. Who's going to complete the report? The million-dollar question. Who's going to do the report? And I see you guys looking at each other. It seems like it's still being figured out, and that's why you want to have this call. Again, you can do it over email. I don't care. Whatever you do, just make sure that somebody has that designated so that it can be done once you come back from the visit. Very, very important, and unfortunately, it falls to coordinators. I've been there. I feel your pain. It does fall to them, but again, just make sure that somebody knows and has the time set aside to do it. That's the big thing, is to, oh, I'm sorry, that really Didn't help you out, did it? I think we should take a break now, maybe. I'm gonna leave. Yes, but again, we'll show you the report, and it's not nearly as bad as you would think. I think making sure that it's very clear about what you need to do and how to do it is going to alleviate some of the hesitation there. What questions you want to ask for the interviews and focus group? When you get that survey back, when you get the best practices table back, you want to be looking at areas that have no on the best practice table, and you just want to glance over the survey. You don't need to go in detail and mark every single little thing, but if something jumps out at you, good or bad, if you see something like how often do you do drug testing? Once a month. When is it? Every third Tuesday. Okay, red flag, right? We want to talk about that. But if you see something, they've had law enforcement on their team, and the sheriffs and the local police department show up to staffing in court, and you're like, oh my God, I would love to have that. Mark that too, because you want to know, hey, how'd you grease those wheels? Tell me, I need to know. So mark good and bad things. That's going to inform your questions for the team member interviews, but you're also going to carry them over to the focus group too. If they do drug testing every third Tuesday, once a month, you want to ask the participants about that. Can you guys beat test? How does it work? What do you do? Those things are really going to, so again, having that kind of set and just throwing out the ideas. You don't need to have them worded perfectly, but you know what? I want to ask about law enforcement. I want to ask about their drug testing. Get on the same page before you get out there. And then, of course, once everything is set, you'll want to send a final kind of itinerary of, okay, here's who's going where, here's where we're going to be. Fill out that cover page, put your addresses, whatever you need to do. I put it on the site visit schedule, actually, where we're going, what time, when, all of that stuff, and send it to everybody just so we're all on the same page. And that way, when we show up and people are confused or whatever, it's like, no, we've covered this, we've talked about this, this is all set. I'm not going to go over what to bring with you. This is all pretty straightforward, but I would recommend reviewing it. You might forget business cards, and people will want to talk with you afterwards. They'll want to, if you have great ideas or you want to talk about, again, getting law enforcement on board, make sure you have that kind of stuff. So just make sure you review that and, keep those things with you, or at least consider bringing them. At the site, again, this is kind of, we've been talking about a lot of this. It's interviews, focus group, observations, right? There's also going to be the debrief. There's also going to be the follow-up call, but that's basically what this is saying, is these are your major tasks while you're there. And then again, back home, spending that half day, writing that report, doing the summary. When you have the phone call with the folks, you're going to incorporate that information, if there's anything relevant, back into the report, and that's how it's going to be finalized there. So, and then the last thing, probably before we maybe take a break, I think it's maybe a good time, is once the report is done, is it sent to the site for review? Are you guys getting it first? Do you know what what would be the ideas there? Or?
We would recommend is that the reviewers send the report to us, and I'm double checking with Brennedy that this is still the same. Like I said before, you guys are first year of this, so we're very much open to learning what does or doesn't work about the process from you guys as reviewers. But we're recommending that the report then be sent to us, and we'll kind of game plan with you as reviewers and facilitate scheduling the conference call, which will be that second follow-up or debrief with the court that was reviewed. Again, at a minimum, the judge and the coordinator for that court, but they may very well want to get as many team members as possible on the phone, either, piggybacking on staffing is usually a good time frame so that everybody can have a chance to hear what that report entails and ask questions.
Right. All right. So I think it's a good time for a break, right? Is anybody so excited they want to push through? There we go. We got one, two. Get two and we'll stay. So, no, let's take a few minutes. 10 minutes? All right, we'll see you all. Yep, see you in 10 minutes. Do we got everybody back, it looks like, right? Can you grab that door real quick? Oh, there we go. Never mind. So to backtrack really quick, I was realizing when I was going through this, this is document C. This information is contained later on in the focus group specific materials, but when you're planning with your peer review court, I think it's really important to note, I highlighted this section, I think it's on the second page of C. There's some real key things that you want to make sure that you tell the coordinator when you set up the focus group. I realize we don't have the number on there. Like I think it's somewhere later in the confidentiality guidelines maybe, but you want no more than 12. You absolutely do not want more than 12 people in that group. 10 to 12 is what I usually tell people. If they get 12, inevitably a couple people fall off or don't show up. Anywhere, I mean, I've done a group as low as 3 or 4 and still gotten good information. So when you're talking with the coordinator initially and you're talking about that focus group, you're talking about the setup and where it's going to be and how, tell them a number so that they have that number in their head. You do not want 20 people in there. The treatment providers can tell you any group over 12 starts to get really unruly, and it's just hard to get good information. People are much less likely to talk. So make sure that you bring that up. Also, that to sell it to them, and granted, if this is 6 months away, it's going to be, you don't have to necessarily focus so heavily on this, but you want to let them know it is confidential. They need to know that. The participants need to know that right off the bat. That's because I think you're going to lose a lot of people if you don't mention that right away. Like, hey, come tell us what you don't like about our program. Like, no one's going to sign up for that. So telling them it's confidential and that it's not going to be them, there cannot be more than 12 people, are just a couple of things I would note when you're first talking with those people. So I think we need to, yeah. Absolutely. What I tell people is we want a random sample. We don't want them cherry-picked at all. And what it typically falls to is who has availability. Participants who have jobs and have to take off to do it, I tell them don't ever let them miss work. They should not. That's the other thing is adding with the 6 to 12. This is voluntary. It has to be told to them that it is voluntary. Don't let the court say, well, we're going to make these 9 go because we can make them do. We'll have the judge order it. Do not do that. It needs to be voluntary. They need to want to come and do this. I'm sorry, what were you? The demographics, yes. Unfortunately, you can't always control for that. I think what the biggest factor that makes up the group is who's available, who's not working, who doesn't have kids and has to get babysitters and, all of that. So ideally, yes, you definitely want, an equal amount of like men and women, representative of whatever demographics they have, age, that type of thing. But it's just not we know our participants' lives, they're hectic, they're kind of crazy. It's not always in the cards. So, did some other hand? Yeah.
Is your experience that the 15-minute block is sufficient?
No, the focus group should be at least an hour, and I think we didn't actually put a focus group in that template there because we didn't want people to think, oh, we have to do it on day 2 at 1 o'clock. The focus group, you're going to wipe out the. I could just show you actually. When you go to the sheet, you're just going to wipe out the line. So if the group's going to be at 10, you're just going to take this out. And are you telling them a certain time? I mean, what we're usually scheduled for is an hour 15 or about an hour. Again, it kind of depends. Some participants, it's hard to give up an hour. It just may not work out. But an hour 15 is what we usually go for. And then if that kind of ends up staggering your lunch, or you get like an extra half hour for lunch, or you have to kind of have 12:45 interview, something like that, then again, just adjust as needed. But I wouldn't try to cram in a bunch of things. The focus groups it's like herding cats. It takes a little bit to get together. People kind of disperse slowly. You might have to do cleanup and, if you have food or drink, that kind of thing. So I would definitely count for no less than an hour, I would say. And if you can afford it, if the team is up for it, if they are willing to stay, you could go an hour 15, almost to an hour and a half. But I think the focus group participants are kind of ready to go right about an hour, it seems. So, good question. Anything else about that?
We do find food is useful,
Yeah.
all joking aside, with the focus group to encourage people to come. And so if the district is able to contribute pizza or something like that, I think that can be, and it's also kind of a nice icebreaker.
Absolutely. I hate party planning kind of stuff, so I never like to do it. I always want to give money out, give gift cards, but everybody's like, oh, that's so mean and stale. It's like, I don't care. But I'd much rather do something like this. I don't want to do party planning kind of stuff. It's not my thing. So, but you're right. The food they're always very appreciative, especially if you get like a local pizza joint or, something that they're really not expecting. They do very much enjoy that. So, and yes, you still had a question? Yeah. I guess that's something we can talk about. I didn't know if there was any. Are we just doing active?
Yeah, we're just doing active participants, but they could be participants that are participating sanctioned or that are very successful, and we specifically don't want to pick one or the other. We're going to get into it. It'll have to be random about who shows up, and I'd like to hear about Leadville's experience. But the couple that I have been in, we actually have naturally gotten kind of people at the beginning of the program, people at the end, people that were struggling, and so we felt like it was a nice representation of the program.
In our focus group, there were 13 people in court that morning. One had to go to a job interview. So there were 12 who were available. 9 of them showed up for the focus group out of the 12. And
Yeah.
I think you may get skewed results. The people that are engaged in the program are the ones more likely to stick around. The people that are sort of on the fringe are the ones who are going to just bolt as soon as possible, and you're not going to capture their complaints.
And it's, oh, yes, Judge.
The food or refreshments is the district's responsibility, or will you guys help with that? How does that work?
That's a great question. It's typically not something that we can pick up,
Just because if we look at doing multiple peer reviews every month, that adds up really quickly. But if the district can't, let's have a conversation about what that looks like, because I really do think it's important not only just to encourage them to come, but it's showing that we value their time too. And so if we are able to do that and the district can't, then let's just have an open dialogue about it.
We just did donuts, or the district we visited did donuts, and they were appreciated.
well, and I know that Eagle did pizza when Eagle first up. And we also gave our participants a little bit of community service.
Absolutely. That's a good point. I think we're going to cover some of this later, but it's good to note here because they're going to have to kind of sell this a little bit to the participants to show up. They should absolutely get credit for a meeting or a support meeting or community service. Something should happen. I think at a minimum that should happen. And then the kind of nice touch would be the food and the drink and that type of thing. So yeah, these are great questions. I'm glad you guys are thinking about all this.
You'll get into this a little later, but the theme that we want to highlight here is that we're incentivizing participation, but we do not want at any point to court order participants that they have to be a part of the focus group. So that's the one thing with this that we don't want to do.
And I've done dozens of these focus groups now, all kinds of mix. It's very obvious that the only ones that's very obvious are the ones that are cherry picked when they're just like, God, I love drug court and just I want to stay in forever. And you got like 6 of them. And you're like, I don't know if they really did a random sample, but otherwise, I'd say, we get great information. Even the ones that are doing well, some people that are graduating, they'll still have gripes. They'll have issues. They'll say, I'm sick of drug testing 4 times a week. You'll get good information. I can't think of any focus group I've done where I didn't at least get at least a few very good just kind of nuggets of information that I could throw into the report. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. Whatever they can kind of get, and again, it's not court ordered. It has to be voluntary. So that's going to really make that up. Are there any other questions? Is there?
The other thing was, the FIT was really great because they had Spanish speakers in their courts, so they had the interpreter available for the focus group. So that's just
Yeah, that's fantastic. So how did that work? Were they in the focus group with you then, and just kind of awesome?
Spanish speakers had their headsets on while the interpreter was translating, and then we would have their comments translated through.
It's great. So, yeah, and I'm guessing you may run into that in several jurisdictions. So yeah, that's good. Excellent. Anything else? These are really good questions. We're going to again cover some of this later, but this is really good.
That the fifth has a very dedicated interpreter who I think went above and beyond to be an active part of this process. But that could be a good question that we learned from this one on my end to ask maybe in the logistics form and include moving forward is, do you have Spanish speaking participants, especially in that demographic section, to really learn that in advance? So if it is a jurisdiction where there is more of a, for lack of a better phrase, bureaucratic process that needs to be involved to get an interpreter dedicated to this session, that we have time on our end to maybe assist in facilitating if that's possible or not.
Okay, so we're going to skip a little bit around, so I want to make sure we cover. So we were on document C for a long time. That was kind of just that real long general overview. We've gone over document D. That's the one that they fill out with all the logistics, parking, and time of staffing, that kind of thing. E is the PDF. That's the best assessment. So that's just for your reference there. We went over F, which is the treatment definitions that you'll send along with that PDF or with the survey itself. And then we also did H, which is the schedule and sign-up sheet. So I'm not going to go over those anymore since we've talked about them in detail. But G is where we need to go next. So the best practices table itself. And you guys will, I don't think yours is filled out. Mine will have, mine has the yes and no's. But this is what it looks like. This is what you're going to get. And when we talked about formulating those questions for the team member interviews and also for the focus group, this is what we're talking about. So you're going to get this thing. You're going to also have the survey, of course, and have some answers. And I kind of gave a few examples there. But I was thinking this is kind of the participation portion of the training, and I can see you all groaning when I say that. But I want to see what I would do with this is, if this is the court that we have, and I just made some of these up, you're looking through this and you see all the yeses. What you first want to look, not first want to look at, but what you'll notice is the no's. You'll just see what kind of barriers they may have. And for this one, law enforcement is a member of the team. They're not, they don't come to staff meetings and they don't come to court. You can see at 1.9 there on the bottom. So for me, I would ask the question of, do you guys have law enforcement participation on your team? Have you ever had law enforcement participation on your team? Have you ever tried to approach law enforcement about being on your team? What is law enforcement's view of you as a court locally? Are they supportive? Are they indifferent? Where are they at? Just very general questions about the whole process of, are they engaged? Are they not? Have you ever tried to? Do you invite them to graduations? Those are the kind of questions that would pop into my head. I've been doing this a long time, so those kind of come a little more naturally. But again, think about it like that, very globally, just basic, just literal questions there. So that might be a question I would add onto the team member interview questions that we'll look at later. Next one is attorneys on the court or on the team attend staffing and court sessions, and they have a no. So that would be a question too. Is what team? Don't say like, why don't your attorneys show up? Do they ever show up? Like, why don't they show up? You don't want to ask questions like that. Think of them very generally. Just who shows up to your team staffings? What team members participate in staffing? Which ones participate in court? When they list everything off and they say that maybe the prosecutor doesn't have time to come to court every time, that'll kind of give you your answer, and then you'll talk about that. Does that have any effect on when you're in court? Do issues ever arise and you need a prosecutor there? In those cases, what do you do? If, say, the defense attorney doesn't come to court, that's a good question to ask the focus group participants. You can want to talk to the team about it, but also ask the participants, have you ever needed your defense attorney? Do you care that he's there or not? Just think about ways to ask the participants if there's an effect on them too. It's really easy to remember these questions for the team members. It's easy to forget for the focus group. They're the ones that are going to be feeling this. Time between arrests is 50 days or less. A lot of courts, of course, are going to have a no on this. Again, just ask, what's your average arrest to entry time? Do you have what kind of barriers do you run into? Have you guys tried to take any steps to try to address them? Have they worked? What are you thinking next? Just those kinds of things. Seeing where they're at, where they've been, where they're going with it. So,
And on a side note, really
yes.
quick, what you see in brackets up there, in bold brackets, it might look a bit like a foreign language, but all of these are cross-referenced to the Colorado Standards document. And so all of the best practices show up in our Colorado Standards. And this just, so actually Shannon Carey went through every single item and cross-referenced it. And so we literally needed a PhD to do this, right? And it's a very
I'm so glad that that's on video, because I actually ended up being the one that did that crosswalk. So PhD level, even though I don't have it, thank you. I need a copy of that before I go. So and it was tedious. You were correct. So this is my yes. No, great. I love the questions. Please.
That's a great question. So the co-best is we already have the online assessment just for family drug courts, but we don't have our own cutoff standards.
Yeah, so you're not gonna see the brackets correlating that to our own standards because they're still in draft form. So the online assessment has already been modified for family drug courts. The example you have in your book is just for the adult drug courts. Does that make sense? The results will look very similar, but you'll get ones. The report will be specific to family drug courts when you go through that one. But that's again NPC, and now I'm guessing Adrian actually just does everything at NPC.
I like that too. We really want this video here. Keep going.
They modified all of their assessments with specific research for our juvenile drug courts, vet courts, mental health courts, and family drug courts.
So how that will work is after that initial phone call with the court that wants to be reviewed, I will send in information to Shannon for a login for that court. Thank you. I will send in information for the login for that court, and a piece of the information that I send in to Shannon is what type of court this is that's going to be reviewed. So when she creates that login and sends it back to the coordinator, the identified person for the court being reviewed, it will be specific to that court type.
Yeah, you'll see like it says team members, it'll actually have the family drug court team members as opposed to probation and law enforcement or whatever. So, and like she said, by and large, most of them do apply to the family drug courts. If you're kind of looking at them side by side and glancing at them, you wouldn't really notice the difference. But the terminology, of course, would be different. But otherwise, it's going to be very, very similar, but still specific to the family drug court. So, any other questions? And yeah, questions for SCAO for sure. And this is what you guys are doing. So, okay, so for the participation portion, and I will say I do have bribery here, so I will give out some stuff for people who are participating really well. Towards the end, you have to remind me, I don't want to forget, but I do have some good stuff to provide. So, does anybody want to take a stab at, if you saw this on the best practice table, what kind of questions would you want to ask the team once you got there? Like, what's something that you would come up with just to ask the team to try to get at, this issue here? Or not this issue, but just what's going on there. And just shout it out, or if you don't know. Okay. And a good way to think about it is, say you don't know this answer, like say this is blank. What kind of question would you ask to get at this statement here? Something very simple, just how many treatment providers do you guys use? What kind of, yeah, go ahead. Perfect. How is it decided where people go if you have more than two, or if you have two or more? How many of you, yeah, go ahead.
If you have to, how is it that you got there?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a good reason if you're 3 or 4.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anything else? A key one to think about for treatment providers is communication. Who comes to staffing? Who comes to court? If you got 4 treatment providers, what's that like? Is the coordinator, get all of that information? Does just one of them show up? Do all of them show up? Do they only show up if their people are in court or staffing? Those are the kind of questions you want to think about critically to get at how the program's operating. And again, that will inform you for the focus group too. Who goes where? Do you see any differences? Do you feel like your treatment's easier? You can really go anywhere with that when you get to the focus group too. See what kind of effect that may or may not have. Okay, let's go down to. So this is the next no. Anybody have any? If you saw this, what you would ask or? That's good. Love it. Those are good questions. People don't ask that enough on site visits. I always get at that. How much synthetics are you doing? Anything else?
That's what their graduation criteria includes.
Perfect. There you go. Okay. How about the next one? Sanctions are imposed immediately after non-compliant behavior. That's a no. What kind of questions would you, anything come to mind? Ah, love it. That is so perfect. There it is. And that's very open-ended, very general. They describe their process. I guarantee you when you ask that question, as they describe it, you're going to think of other things. Because they say they don't do it immediately. So, well, we do it, probation officers do it. Where do they do it? How do they do it? Do they wait after court? Can they do it on weekends? That will really start to spur a lot of other questions. And again, that will carry over to the focus group. That will, what do you guys think about when you receive sanctions? Are they different when they come from the judge in court versus your PO in her office? That kind of thing. So is my making sense here? I'm hoping that's the kind of things you have to think about. Again, it comes very easy for me. I do this a lot, so I just kind of assume people think of those things, but it's really not. It's kind of hard to get into that mindset of, okay, like what does this really mean when it says no? And tell me more about it. Let's talk more about it. And that's really where I always come from, is just tell me more. Let's talk about it. Let's hear more. And that always inevitably leads to questions. So more questions.
And what you'll notice with a lot of the questions is it's a lot of motivational interviewing. And so for those of us who have been trained on that or even kind of know about it, it's that open-ended, it's very strengths-based, and that's how we want to approach these programs as well, is almost that parallel process.
Mm-hmm. So what about this next one here about graduation requirements to have a job or be in school? They say no. What's the kind of general question talking about motivational interviewing, open-ended? Anything? Don't overthink it. What are your graduation requirements? Right? But you can just ask, what are your graduation requirements? And they'll talk about generally kind of what they are. If they don't mention school or a job, just say, is having a job or being in school a part of the graduation requirements? They say no. Okay, is that an exception? Does nobody have to have one? It may, what we typically find with this is that if somebody's disabled and is unable to work, that's why they tend to have a no. So it's good to clarify that kind of information and make sure that it's not like, well, we don't care if they're, as long as they're just doing okay, we get them out of here kind of thing. That's what you're really trying to get at, is making sure it's not something like that where they're not worried about a job or school. Okay, so I hope that at least gives you a general idea of kind of what to think about when you see these no's. And do you have something? Or you were looking like you were going to say something else. So we won't go over these other ones. Yes?
You focused on the no's.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any yeses we should be suspicious of?
If you have all yeses, that's definitely suspicious. They probably know what to answer on the survey to get a yes. That would be a red flag for me. I've never seen a court that had all yeses. And if they did, it was not actually true. The yeses, I wouldn't say red flags. I would say you go back to, oh, hey, they're doing that and we're not, and we've never been able to. How are they doing that? Again, they have an MOU between all of their different departments. We've never been able to get everybody together. Nobody wants to sign it. Nobody wants to agree upon it. How did you do that? Who did you talk with? Who facilitated that? So those are what I would look at with the yeses. If you're already doing drug testing twice a week and they're doing it, there's not much else you need to ask. But absolutely, if something stands out that your court is not able to do or has struggled with or is on the fence about doing, and they say yes, talk to them about it. See where they're at. See how they got there. That's what I would suggest.
Real simple. Is there a specific number of questions that you want to have us ask? Say 10, 12?
There's not a set number. Yeah, right. I'd say, in my experience, I think because you're going to a lot of effort to set this site visit up, to get these people on a schedule and have them take an hour out of their day, some of them it's really hard to do that. I at least like to talk to folks for at least a half an hour, just because we've done our very, very first site visit, not peer reviews, but just process visits. We kind of went, and we had some interviews that went really quickly. You'll notice as the day goes on, as you have your first interview, you will ask all questions, and you'll get tons of answers. Your last interview, you've covered so much of it, you don't necessarily need to ask, well, how often do you drug test? You already know, 6 people have told you. So those interviews get really short, and what we found is that those team members, they end up talking after the fact, like, hey, how'd your interview go? What'd they ask you? How long did they talk to you? And they kind of, I think they kind of felt like the amount of time we talked to them was equal to their importance with the program. And so ever since then, I've thought, I don't want to make anybody feel like that. It's not as if we don't care, we don't want to talk with them or whatever. It's just that we end up running out of questions. So for me, I over-prepare. I always bring a large number of questions just in case, and I usually don't end up asking most of them. I want to revisit this because we're going to get to the team member interview questions soon, and I would kind of like to see how folks who have done it, what they thought about the questions and if there were enough. Because again, if you ask 8 questions of one person, you might go 45 minutes. And if you ask 8 of the next, it might go 10. If they're just very quiet, very shy, they say yes, no kind of things, then yeah, it can be kind of abrupt. And I think you just want to make sure that people feel validated and that it's a good use of their time. So yes, we'll definitely get to it. It's a good question, great question. Anything else on this? Anything else at all? I love the participation. I don't ever want to leave here. So. Okay, so we went over the schedule, obviously. I don't know if there's any more questions about that, but you guys know the drill about that. Again, I guess one thing just to point out, because it's obvious, is there's a day 3. It's if needed. This is probably going to get removed. Make sure you don't see that and think, all right, well, we got to start just talking to strangers on the 3rd day. So clean this up, make sure you use it, make sure that it's accurate for what you're doing. This is just a sample confidentiality form for the site that you're visiting. If they want assurance or they want documentation that you will not be sharing this information and taking the participants' names and throwing it online, that kind of thing, you can adapt this for them and use that. So I don't know if you guys have had to use that or if anybody runs into that at all, but it's just there for that reason. Does anybody?
Most of our programs have their own.
Right,
We
right.
just want to make sure, this is a good reminder,
Yeah.
that we're signing those as peer reviewers.
Mm-hmm. So again, you may not need this, but if you do, it's here. Okay, so the team member interview questions, here we go. So there's some reminders. You want to review the assessment, you want to review the table, you want to note questions that kind of stand out to you, good or bad. You want to decide who's going to be leading the interview, and you want to make sure you know who's taking notes. You also want to make sure you do a little bit of a intro. It's a little weird to just have somebody come in and tell us about your job duties. I mean, that's literally how sometimes it goes. And people usually just roll with it, but I really like to at least provide a little bit of background. Who we are, what we're doing, why we're here, reiterating once again, we're not trying to catch anybody red-handed with something. Even just a couple minutes of that and designate somebody to give that little spiel, I think that really goes a long way.
Add in here, we found that varies a bit according to the role of the person that you're interviewing. So I found that I picked up on more questions about my role with the state court administrator with those interviewees who were familiar with the judicial branch or were possibly a part of the judicial branch themselves than maybe treatment providers. They weren't as concerned about my role specifically. So us at the state court administrator's office, myself, Kyle, Sierra, Brennedy, if we're participating, our role is going to be pretty minimal in this process. We're there to support it and enhance if we can, but we're really going to be sitting back and letting you as reviewers run the show. But this is one part where we might jump in initially and answer a few questions about why we are and aren't there, just to, again, relieve any of those concerns that this is an audit or us coming in to look for deficits in the program.
That's a great point. What you run into, like with the judges typically know each other. They've seen each other over the years, and they're comrades. So they just kind of jump into talking, and that's fine too. If it kind of depends again on each person. So this is just some information we've been kind of talking about. The thing that we went through with the best practice table is what I was trying to get across is that make sure these questions you're asking are open-ended. do whatever you can to try to avoid the yes/no questions. It's hard to sometimes, it really is, especially when you're just kind of thinking things and follow-up questions come to mind. But try to avoid them as much as possible. Try to just talk very generally. How do you do this? Describe this to me. Tell me about those kind of things. And so that's just a reminder there. And 4 and 5 are, again, well, 4 is about making sure you look through the table and address any areas that say no. You want to make sure you clarify those to see whether they're correct or not, whether they're accurate. And then the number 5 is where a lot of the peer reviewers spend their time, and this is really great. We want to make sure that you do this and you have time for this. As long as the first several things are accounted for, you're going to get to this, and this is the part that peer reviewers love. They get to talk to somebody who's in their role in another jurisdiction who has either the same set of issues or similar issues or completely different ones, and they're fascinated by it. Their minds are blown every time that they hear about, oh my God, you let in probation violators? Like, how does that happen? How does that even work? Who did you talk to? So we encourage that. If you get to the point where you have your questions answered, and it may help if you have a shorter interview or something like that, where talk about what is interesting to you, and you will, within the first couple hours or so, you will hear and see things that you never thought, like, oh my gosh, drug courts do this, or there's a program that does this or has this, and go with that, learn about it, ask them about it, talk about it, get their business card. Let's chat some more afterwards, so we can get this rolling on our end. So we want to make sure that you don't just get focused on that. When we first did our pilot interviews, people just jumped right into that. They're like, okay, I don't care about anything else. Tell me about how you do this. And it's fine to do that. What I found is there's always time for that. There's always going to be time for that. So then here are the questions themselves. And again, I would maybe call on the folks that have actually done this and done interviews. Does anybody have any feedback? Were the questions, were there enough? Were they good? Did you struggle with time? Did you feel like things were short? Did it go great and there was no issues at all? What's just generally what you think about it?
As many of you know, I could talk for days. So I felt like it was a little bit rushed, but it was also a really nice platform for me to kind of discuss some other issues that were going on and get feedback from other people. So as the person being interviewed, it was just a relief to kind of bring some issues to light that I was concerned about. I felt good leaving the process, even though it did feel a little short, but as I said, I could talk forever. So.
Sure. And did you do any interviews where you asked these questions of somebody in your role?
Yeah.
How did that go?
I interviewed Christina.
Okay.
And fortunately, ahead of time, Christina and I had already spent a great deal of time talking, so I had a good idea of how things were going for her. But it was still really valuable to see how other jurisdictions were doing it. It felt like a light turned on in my head, just being new to drug court at that point in time, and being able to see that other programs do things differently and that there's alternative ways to approach situations. So it was really great to hear Christina's feedback.
So it worked for you. That's good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Anybody else that's done it? Is there? I know it's you guys. Is there anybody else?
I actually took all of the questions and pre-typed them because I'm a handwritten person because I didn't want to have my laptop as a barrier so I could make more eye contact when interviewing people. So Judge Green and I had all of the generic questions ready so we could ask each team member pretty much the same questions, which was really helpful because you'll get different responses.
Absolutely.
And then it gave us consistency, almost like interviewing people for a job, you know? And then when it came to the position-specific questions, we kind of would go back to this binder, and that was really helpful.
Okay. So did anything get cut short, or was it was enough for you to carry through and have all your questions, and did you feel like it filled the time?
We filled the 50 minutes and sometimes more.
Sure. Great.
This goes without saying, but stay on schedule because that 10-minute break is crucial to keep your energy level up for a whole day of interviewing people, and you don't want to be burned out at the end. And Judge, I don't remember your name, but you were talking about the yeses on the best assessment, and some of the generic questions are what do you see working well in the program, so they can bring that information out without you kind of referring to the best results specifically. Most people will say, well, we're really proud of this aspect of our program, so a good use of the time is to focus on the areas that may need some improvement, but you're also going to be capturing information about the program that they're proud of, that they think should be shared throughout the state. Aside from that, like Sarah said, we had about a dozen stock questions. We worked on the best assessment at the end of our interview, and it was definitely helpful if the entire reviewed team has looked at the best assessment and did it as a group, because you don't want to spend time with the people arguing that that result isn't accurate. Instead of it's accurate, how do we address it?
Right. Great feedback.
One of the things that I think stood out that Adams County had done with us that I don't know that we did as great of a job at is they came super prepared with their questions also. So they would ask some of the role-specific questions, but they had each taken time in advance to look at their position. So Kasha interviewed probation and added some of her own questions in that. So the one thing I was going to say is pay attention to your timeliness, because Kasha and I are talkers, and it probably doesn't bother us if you run a few minutes over or if you're a few minutes late grabbing me. We had a couple of our folks from the deputies from the jail interviewed, who are much more used to stricter timelines and probably much more punctual than some of us court folks can be. And they were taken pretty late, and we got some feedback about that. They were a little frustrated that, we were running behind on schedule and like that. So just be cognizant of who your audience is, because, some people appreciate, their interview time frame and being within that, and other, the jail folks had to get back to a jail assignment and duty and role, and that was important. So when they were running late, you're kind of affecting a whole system.
0900, let's go.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, absolutely. So I think what we have heard from other sites and in the other states is that is similar feedback to what you guys just provided. Is that the questions are good. They do typically fill up most of the time. You're going to have a lot of follow-up that doesn't show up here, because again, they're just generally when they're talking about things, it's like, oh my gosh, like 4 questions are going to come to mind in several instances. So. I was a little worried that this might be too short, and for what I do with my process visits, which are much more in depth, I have a long laundry list of questions, but my report is much more in depth and much more detailed. So I'm glad to hear that, and I think that maybe will hopefully ease some of the, absolutely, it will ease concerns. I know for me, I've always kind of had that, so I'm glad you brought it up, but it sounds like it's working, and that's good. I mean, that's why we did this.
Sarah and Judge Green don't mind. I think they did a great job at the beginning of the interviews of explaining how the information would be summarized and not attributed in quotes. Would you mind kind of summarizing? If I could put you on the spot, one of you. You don't remember? Sarah, I can summarize.
Really casual. We made it a conversational atmosphere, so it didn't feel like an interview. It felt like a conversation about the program, so people were comfortable. And we had let the conversation wander a little bit, knowing that we could always bring it back on track. But having that flexibility to capture information that's not scripted or that we're not specifically seeking, I thought was valuable. As far as the introductory process, do you remember?
You had an excellent spiel at the time, but I can't remember it. I just remember that you had basically reassured people that, it was a friendly peer review process and that it was more of a learning opportunity for both courts. And I think it put people at ease right off the bat.
And Lisa, feel free to add to this. What I remember and liked was that you said that while you would be recording themes for both positive feedback and areas for improvement, you wouldn't go back into the debriefing session and attribute comments directly to one team member, so that no team member felt singled out. And I thought you created a very safe place for the interviewees to share what they liked about the program, and then if they had any suggestions for improvements or this isn't working too well, I felt like you created a safe place for them to share those, knowing that they wouldn't be called out directly by name to the team about that. So,
Lisa, I just wanted to add that I think I was relatively comfortable with them coming because I had a lot of information, but I actually had other team members who maybe aren't as quite as involved day to day as I am, that were like a little nervous about the interview, and afterwards they said, "Oh, it was great. I was very comfortable." I think they were a little bit more nervous, like our defense attorney, just like, what are they going to ask me? Like,
Yeah,
what?
yeah.
And so they did do a great job of just making it very casual, very relaxed, particularly, I think, for other team members that were not quite as in tune to, just the day-to-day or as, to what was happening, so.
Yeah, because a lot of team members aren't involved in the planning. They're just, you tell them, hey, there's an interview at 10, go. And that's, you'll get a good deal of that. I mean, I think you just nailed it on the head. That's perfect.
And I guess particularly because they spent that time prior to the interview introducing themselves and talking about what they were going to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to follow up with that, I think they were very attentive to the mood of the room as well, and when to sort of use the script questions to be flexible with how someone may be presenting themselves to encourage them to talk. And so they were cognizant of what was going on while they were trying to do their duty as well.
That's fantastic. Everything that you're doing is what I have learned over time doing my interviews, and my little spiel is 4 or 5 sentences or so. It's nothing too crazy, but again, you try to ease fears about what you're doing, leading up to it. But even then, you get into the interview, someone hasn't been involved, or even if they have been, they're still kind of, and just setting that tone, making it conversational, keeping it light, having just, like I said, just a conversation with the person goes such a long way. So it's great to hear that. And I would guess that maybe Brenedy, you might have him write something up, even if he doesn't remember, because I think what I do for me is just a little thing that just comes off the top of my head. It's not about, real specifics or, hyper specific things. It's just all the issues that you laid out. We're not going to share this across interviews. We're not going to name names in reports. Everything is confidential. All of those things, I think, really do set the tone. So one thing I wanted to hit on is that, I can't remember who said it, but it was great. Asking if you get an answer to a question, a basic question, do you do testing twice a week? And somebody says yes. I can't emphasize enough. Ask those questions across everybody. It's so shocking how many, you'll ask 6 people and it'll be twice, 3 times a week, 1 time a week, we don't drug test, and every day. I mean, you will really get that. And that speaks to the team and how the program is functioning. And you will see those little nuances in there. You'll be surprised. You would think there's no way everybody's not on the same page about this. Again, arrest and entry dates, sanctions, and most common incentives, those kinds of things. So it really is good. It may feel repetitive, but I think it absolutely gives you that picture. This is great. A couple other questions here, the main challenge and the suggestions to improve the program. Those are always really good questions. That's where I think that's where you got to make sure that people feel very reassured that information is not going to be spread among the team and in the debrief and that type of thing. But those are really good questions I just wanted to point out. Great. Anything else? Yeah.
Has it right there at the bottom, Adrian, but avoiding referencing other interviews or referencing identifying information. And it came up, I only say that because it came up, unassumingly. You're not trying to put somebody else out there, but you might have gotten good information from a different team member and said, oh, probation was telling us yesterday that this happened, because then you're kind of, crossing over into that confidentiality. And so just be really cognizant if you're going to reference a piece of information you got somewhere, keeping it real general.
Yeah, it's easy to slip. But if you've heard from 3 people that we have this crazy issue about arrest to entry, you can just say, well, we've heard, there's some arrest to entry delays. Can you tell me about that? We've heard that. I mean, that's okay. I mean, that's a program issue that everyone's aware of. That's not going to get tied back to somebody. So, no, this is great feedback. And this next form is actually pretty much everything we just talked about. I mean, we've really gone into detail about all of this inadvertently here, but having the designated person, having a primary person, giving the intro, don't, give yes, no questions, ask those open-ended things. We made this sheet because when we had a pilot site visit in another state, they really needed to hear it a few more times. Even though we said it in the first page, they needed a whole separate reminder of, hey, really make sure you're doing these. Like, we told them, but then we double told them. So and that did help them. Okay, so next form is going to be L. That's the pre-court staffing. And this is pretty straightforward. It's just going to be noting a few things. You know, when the judge comes in, how many people, when it ends, that's a big one. You're usually by the end of the staffing session, it can be a couple hours. So don't forget to mark that down. I do that all the time. Note the number of people that come into court. I mess that up all the time too. I do tallies. I try to get counts. I try to get docket copies and whatnot. I still forget a lot. So remember to try to keep on that so that it'll give you the information so you can look at how much time the judge is spending with each participant. And then again, just checking off who's there, some basic questions. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. This is the court hearing one. It looks just like this is the court hearing one, it looks like, right? Does this look, oh, here we go. I clicked on the wrong one. I'm sorry. So again, I didn't even catch that I was talking about court there. So here's the staffing one. Who's there? Very basic questions. Yes, no, sometimes. It's really just your impression of things. Who's leading? Who's offering input? Who's suggesting things? Who looks not invested? Who looks involved? Who is involved? How are they involved? What those kinds of things are. I just like to just very generally just like, okay, it's great that the PO always weighs in on, how, tries to accentuate the positive, just things that stand out to me. There's not really too much else to go over unless anyone has questions here. But again, it's just answering these questions and trying to give as much detail as you can. Staffing, gets a little long. It can get boring sometimes when you're not actually doing it, and you'll find that out once you're there. I remember the first time I did that, I didn't realize, like, when I was in staffing, it felt just like, oh my gosh, and then watching it, it's a little more dry. It's a little more boring, but you still should, make sure you give your full attention to that. But court now.
Adrian,
Yes, sir.
number 13 says, did ex parte communication occur
Yes.
before the staffing?
That is correct, yeah. Is that in the Is that in the staffing one? I think that one is supposed to actually be in the court observation form because I guess it's something to note if it does happen to staffing. It doesn't happen often, but some courts do bring participants in sometimes prior to court happening, and they may not have attorneys on their team. So I think that's what it's kind of getting at. If it's probably pretty rare that would happen, but I know that this is supposed to be on the court one, and it may not. Does it look like this on your guys' binders, or is it looks the same then? So we might want to check into that. It's not. You really want to make sure it's not happening in court. That's where the focus is there. Okay, so for the court session, so this is everything I already went over. Again, just noting times and numbers, who's there. Very general questions too. Are people staying? Are they going? Does the judge, try to engage other people? Does he talk to other team members? Just what's he or she doing? I tend to answer most of these questions, relatively quickly. I mean, you can kind of get a sense after 4 or 5 participants. And then here at the bottom, I just like to provide my full-on opinion and notes of just what I'm looking at. Like, they seem warm, they seem kind, they seem invested, they seem to care. They seem very authoritative. They seem like they don't ask too many questions. I just, whatever pops into my head as I'm watching them in that court session. So what I wanted to do today is, we're going to skip the first 3 questions because you're not going to be able to see this, but we have some videos of some court sessions that we've recorded. And so I was thinking it'd be good for us to get those sheets out and mark what you think of these interactions based on these questions, and then we can kind of talk about it, because it'll be interesting to see what others think, if people are having the same opinion of things, and whether or not they, agree with you or just see something different. So we'll start with question 4 on this sheet with this interaction here. This is the court one. This is going to be a court session. Yeah, staffing, we don't have any videos for that. So it's M. So document M. Start with question 4. You'll see this interaction start here. It's about 2 or 3 minutes or so. And just kind of, again, give you a very general.
And real quick, for those like me and Kyle and I'm sure others that hate the thought of writing on our form if we're going to use it later, we will email out electronic copies of all these for you. So don't be scared that this is the
Or
only
make
copy
tiny
you'll
marks,
ever
you know,
get.
maybe a little tiny.
Yes, thank you, Kyle.
I actually thought of that. I just thought I would be giving too much detail at that point, but I'm glad you said that. Okay, so everyone got their form ready? All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to make sure the volume's up here. And forgive me if this is kind of loud at first.
So we had an issue with some drinking.
Yes, we did.
You know, first of all, you know you're going to jail today.
Yes.
All right. And you'll go in a minute. And I don't want to talk about everything today. We'll talk when you come out. And you're going to go for 4 days. But there's some things I want to say to you. You know, first I want to commend you on your honesty. You brought this up on your own in group, and that's good. I mean, you recognized something was happening, and you told us about it. And that's a positive thing. You've had some real good stretches here. You know, things have gone well, and then you've fallen off the wagon. And they've gone well, and they've fallen off the wagon. And that may be a pattern for you that continues. And I don't want you to beat yourself up too much from the fact that you do, because it's the good work in between that we're really trying to recognize and stretching that out longer and longer and seeing you making progress for longer and longer periods, okay? So we're sending you to jail today for 4 days, but with the message that we still have faith in you, and we think you can do this program, and that we support you. When you come out of jail, I want you to get to Sarah as soon as you can to talk about what we can offer, what sort of treatment we can offer you to make these incidents less likely to occur. So what we need to do to up treatment, or what we need to do to focus your treatment in a different direction. She'll help you with that. You had a paper due today, and you turned it in. I'm going to hold off on you reading it until you come to the next meeting. And I'd like you to look at it and perhaps redo it a bit in light of this incident, the fact that you're here and this is your sanction. Can you tell me when was your last drinking?
September 1st.
September 1st was the day. That's the day you reported, and you haven't.
The day before I drank, and that day also.
All right, and nothing since.
No.
Okay. We want to put you back on every court session when you come out. So we'll bring you back every 2 weeks so we can keep track of you and keep talking to you. And I do have to tell you, it's always been our practice and policy. Nothing that happens here doesn't get shared with the state POs. And I know you're sitting on a DUI probation, right? And I don't know what effect that'll have. Judge Hernandez knows more coming out of the state court system, and it could be that they could revoke your probation there or take it away from you. But it is what it is.
Okay.
You'll deal with what you deal with when it happens. All right. Okay. So we'll see you next session.
All right.
And good luck to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's look at our form here, starting with 4. It's kind of hard to tell, but what did you think as far as number 4? What extent did they appear to work as a team in court? Again, based on the small piece that you saw there.
Their presence was there. You knew that other team members were still there.
Right. Okay. Not at all. Anybody else? Or I guess what would you rank that as then? Somewhat.
Based on just the video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Input?
You mentioned other team members, so
Mm-hmm.
knew that they were all on the same page.
Right. Right.
And they, would contribute afterwards.
Mm-hmm. But in the court session itself, not necessarily that much. Okay. Anybody else? Not at all. Okay. Fair. I mean, again, it's see how your perspectives are just a little bit different. You see how people are thinking about things in a certain way, and others see it in one way. There's no wrong answer here, but it's again just kind of individual. Anybody else have anything else there? How about number 5? So how did the judge interact and behave towards the team members? Did they exhibit signs of collaboration and team approach when talking to them? No, not at all.
You mentioned you're going to go check in with so-and-so,
Mm-hmm.
so that alludes to a prior conversation, but there's no apparent collaboration.
Right. Okay. Yeah, did you have something?
It's in the
Right. Right, right. Okay. And obviously you haven't seen the staffing, but clearly what they discussed is what he told the participants, so that would be a yes for letter B. Then number 6, did he speak? So again, we're just getting to the general, just how did the judge interact? Did he speak directly to the participant? Did he stand or sit? Obviously, you know that one. Whom did he request answers from, explanations? Did he do it with the participant? Maybe, no, little? Mm-hmm. Oh. Mm-hmm. Right. Right, okay. Did he allow the participant to speak? Yes, somewhat? Who says somewhat? No? Yeah. No? Yes? Anybody else? Oh yeah, remember there are prizes for participation. You guys are doing great anyway, but there are prizes for participation. I have not forgotten. But anything else there?
I think this demonstrates an interesting point as peer reviewers, is that you may be put in a position where you have to give feedback that isn't always 100% positive. And so maybe for those of you who have been through it or anticipate going through this process as a peer reviewer, how do you give feedback to that judge? Let's say you need to ask more open-ended questions. You need to engage the participant more, or from what we saw, how do you have that discussion and then also write that in your report?
I definitely didn't like that he had all the other participants sitting in the jury box. I think that that's really uncomfortable for all the other participants when he's having this confrontational conversation with the one guy that had the alcohol drink, how that makes them feel. And the guy that was on the end was really restless, was uncomfortable with it. So I'm not sure that I would reward him for that behavior. I think the better way of doing that would have been maybe one-to-one with everybody else in a different location.
How would you provide that feedback to him in a report or even maybe verbally? Would you do it? You know, that's another question, because you do run into this. You will run into this. The setups, the styles, the way that the courts do their thing, it's going to vary pretty greatly. This court, in fact, actually has 2 judges that run it. They alternate every 2 weeks. So just to throw another, matter in there. So, your points are valid, and I think, it's you're not way off with that at all. But again, do you want to say, how do you say that? How do you phrase that? Is it something that's a best practice that we need to discuss, or is it something that's more kind of stylistic and about just their setup? I don't know if you guys have opinions about that, but that's kind of where I tend to try to remind people about the best practices, because the first time you do this, you will absolutely see them. Be like, oh my God, why do they have them all up at once? That's crazy. And that's pretty common. Their setup is not, I've seen, again, 100 drug courts. That's not uncommon at all. I've seen something like that where, and what they have them do is stand up to address the judge, but they are all in that jury box there.
Well, our program, we reward all of what we call the strong starters, and they're all up there together in the gallery of the inside circle of the courtroom. And I understand that, but it was like just uncomfortable for me to watch that.
Sure.
And I can just imagine if I was the guy sitting maybe 2 or 3 seats down, of how I would feel as to, what's he going to do to me? He sent him to jail. Now what's he going to do to me? Like I'm on that firing row, and it just felt uncomfortable.
Sure.
I like how he took himself off the bench, though, and was standing, sort of
More
at the
informal,
same level, informal.
Right.
That part I really liked about him.
And I think you make good points. There's things to highlight, and there's things to also, for him to consider, but being very careful about how that's conveyed to him, especially if it's in person and particularly in the report as well. To say, I don't like this, and I think you should do it this way. We don't want to put those kinds of things in the report, but I think valid, feedback like that can be said in a way that, consider, having participants sit, in a different area. And again, is it research-based? Is there best practices tied to that? And that can kind of help make your case when it comes to that.
And an approach might be to politely ask them, what is it that he's trying to accomplish with that particular format? And then, are there other ways that you might accomplish that goal that way, politely?
Right.
Appears he's a federal judge, so you have to be very polite. But
Correct.
do it that way. Get them thinking about a better way to get to the end result.
Right, and that's a key point when we have had those discussions with judges. Having it from another judge in a different conversation outside of, don't do it in the debrief, for God's sakes. Don't write it in the report. Start with having the peer, have the judge, talk to the judge, and ask that question. I think that is going to be, you'll get a lot of good information, and they'll be more receptive, and whether they agree with it or not, or receptive to it or not, you'll get good information and at least understand more where they're coming from. Because you got to remember, if somebody came into your court and said, "Oh, I can't believe you have everybody come up and sit there. We call them all up at once and let them go." It's like, well, you have a reason for doing it the way you have, and most people have been doing it for a very long time, and judges all have their own style. They really do. But these are really good points, and I think with this in particular, what you suggested is great. And I'd go a step further, but like I said, talking to them one-on-one and seeing how that conversation goes. And I think we actually had that on a couple pilot sites where the judges did go into chambers and just have a kind of a talk among colleagues, and it was really productive. Yeah.
A couple comments.
Sure.
Typically, it seems like a focus group would take place after court when all the participants are there.
Ideally, yeah, correct.
So, as an observer, you want to make sure you're not reading too much into what you're observing and just a wild hypothesis. Maybe the guy on the end had to go to the bathroom. You never know. So you can go to the focus group and say, how do you feel about the environment in the courtroom? Do you like the way the judge has everyone sit together? You can kind of flesh out some things that you observed, but you don't know enough to actually provide feedback yet.
It's an excellent point. I can't tell you how many courts I've been to where I've seen something 10 times worse than this. The judge gets loud. They're very intimidating. They just, they're almost borderline barking sometimes. And you go to the participant, you go to the focus group, and you ask everybody, and they've let it fly with everything they don't like. So they're not afraid of saying something negative about it. They love the judge. They love him. They're like, oh, no, he's great. I need that in my life. I need somebody to make sure I'm staying on straight. And I think that's a really, really great point, that if the participants are really going to tell you whether or not they care about that. And that's, I think that's a really good place for you to pursue that is, let's ask the focus group. What do you guys think of this setup? Do you care? Does it matter? What's just kind of exploring that. So excellent feedback. Anything else? Any other things you guys have?
Add that I think this highlights the importance, as somebody stated before, of giving yourselves as reviewers breaks in between interviews to allow yourself to have your full lunch hour, because this is an exhausting, grueling 2 days. You guys are on from 8 to 5-ish, both days of this process, and to allow yourselves some time to kind of debrief and reflect on what you've observed, and don't feel that pressure that you have to address everything that you see in that verbal debriefing, to allow yourself some time to digest the information. And as I referenced before, I see our role is largely supportive, so we're there to support you in digesting that information and coming to your conclusions as reviewers about what you think is important to address and what different avenues you might have to address that. It doesn't all have to be the same way as Adrian referenced, but to allow yourselves to not have all the answers right away.
So before you watched that video, did you figure everybody was going to be thinking close to what you thought, right? And now that you've heard it, it's probably just a little bit different, right? So let's watch. We got one more. This is another. It's about 3 minutes, 2-3 minutes, so let's try that one more time and see what you guys think.
So Shawana's back? Yeah. How are you?
I'm good.
Are you good? You look good.
Thanks.
Yeah. You are, you're a nice girl. I mean, we've had that conversation. Yeah.
It's never gotten me very far.
Well, I think it has. The other issue is just about ate your lunch. Yeah, so what's different now, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I feel different. I do. I actually applied myself this time in treatment. I did really good in treatment. I got out, I already got a job now, and I feel good about it. They know all about my drug court and all that good stuff. So, and that's the first time that I've actually told an employer about, you know, all this stuff. I just kind of maneuver around it. But so I feel good about that. I got a car. My kid, my oldest kid had his first dance yesterday, and that was amazing that I got to go to that. So I feel good.
Yeah.
I feel good about it.
I'm happy, and I'm glad you're home.
Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah. So let's stay diligent because, you know, you have so much to give back.
I do. I don't know. I really, it's so crazy how bad I did last time I was in treatment, how I got kicked out and didn't apply myself at all, you know, and this time I went in gung-ho, and I don't know, I did really good in treatment this time, and I made it really far. And that is, I mean, I don't get proud much, you know what I mean, but I was proud that I was able to get phase 2 and COD, and, you know.
Yeah, you should be. It's a big accomplishment. Aren't we excited that she's home? She looks terrific.
I was. I didn't even know that she was home, and I saw her in the parking lot. I was very excited that she was home and that she
got a
looks
job
healthy.
already.
And
Yeah, I work at Lloyd's Cleaners. It's super early, but
yeah,
I mean, we worked till 4:30 yesterday, and that killed me. But
they do a really good job. If I've got something I don't want destroyed, that's my first choice in town.
it's a good place. There's really good people that work there, and I'm glad I like it.
Good for you. I'm excited. How long have you been home?
A week Friday.
A week Friday. Claire, have you worked with her so far?
I have. I'm proud, you know, that she has the job. I'm a little concerned about the hours and her being able to meet obligations. She did have a no-show to hour test yesterday.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so, dun dun dun, right? There was this big cliffhanger here. I want to do one quick thing here. So let's go through the questions first, right? Just to see the contrast, again, with these different judges. So starting again with number 4, and actually I should point out the woman right next to the participant was a treatment provider, and to the left of her was probation. So those are the two ladies that were also talking. So, how much did they work as a team? Very much, right? Okay. Any other notes, anything else? How about, It's great feedback to put in a report like that. That's, yeah, great example to put in the report. People love to hear that kind of stuff. Did they exhibit signs of collaboration and a team approach? Yeah. They follow decisions made by the team at pre-court staffing? I guess you probably can't quite tell that, but let's see. In general, did she speak directly? Right? She's obviously standing. Would you say she was warm? Was she warm? Was she, yeah, right? How would you describe the other judge, contrasting the previous judge? Say he's warm too, or is he a little more lukewarm, cold? Freezing? Is he freezing? So somewhere more towards the middle, right? Terrible. I heard that. No, I'm kidding. Hey, it's all right. Everybody sees things a little different. From whom did the judge request answers, info, and explanations? Right? Did she allow her to speak? Right? So she didn't give a sanction there, at least not yet. Did the judge describe what she was doing right and what she would like to see her continue doing? Wasn't that fantastic? Just the way that encouragement. It's really hard to find good examples like this, so we're excited that we were able to capture something like that. Did the judge provide a learning experience for other participants in the courtroom, do you think? They were bringing people into the courtroom during conversations. It didn't seem like a drug court where everyone was there observing. It seemed like a one-on-one, and then that lady probably got taken out, someone else brought in. Sure. They were bringing them in shifts almost. This is a court that has about 1,000 people, just so you know. This is one of the biggest courts you've ever seen. It's enormous. So that's a big part of it, is their courtroom is about as big as this room. It's really tiny considering what it is. But, again, just seeing, good observation still from what you could see there. So anything else, anybody else about the learning experience? Okay, now the $1 million question, right? What do you think? I don't know if you caught that. They said Abertest, that's their drug testing agency. So she's reported what she's reported. She just got out Friday. We were there on like a Tuesday, so that's why the treatment provider had not even seen her until she got to court. She hasn't quite made an appointment yet, or hasn't made it to her appointment yet. You see how she's doing. You see where she's going. What do you guys think? Any thoughts there? She missed. It was a no-show. It was a no-show to the test yesterday, and there's no debating that. Any ideas, suggestions? What do you think? No wrong answers here, by the way. None at all. None at all. I know you guys are thinking something, right? The sanction. Like the sanction. What would you, where do you think they should go with that? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, so you just want to see the whole thing then. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, do you have an approach or an idea of what you would do in that situation? Mm-hmm. That's a good idea. Anything else? What's that? Have her do a schedule? That's good. Okay. Yeah, sure. You think you sanction? Uh-huh. Like whatever your guidelines are, or within whatever your guys' guidelines or policies are. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Anybody else?
Our team would probably issue a sanction and suspend it.
Great.
Depending on how long she's been in the program and
Right, of course.
what her history was and all that kind of stuff.
Sure. Judge?
I think she just did a verbal warning. I mean, she's just back, got a new job. It sounds genuine that she missed it.
Mm-hmm.
I just warn her not to do it again.
Sure.
Yes. With drug tests the same day, make
Sure.
sure she's not hiding something.
Mm-hmm. Sure thing. Yes, sir.
I would probably take a more sterner behavioral response to that, because she's already gone through treatment once. This would be the second time. I'm imagining it would be heavily emphasized in treatment that you will comply with
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Yeah, I feel like if you let her slide now, that just sets up, kind of probably undoes everything that potentially whoever the treatment did for her.
And this is great. See the variation in the responses and the answers. This is not to show who's right or wrong with any of this. This is just a very interesting example, I think. And so we wanted to just get an idea of, seeing what they saw and kind of running into that issue. That's a tricky one. Do you, go with what your guidelines are? Do you make the exception? Do you do something in the middle? Again, everybody's got different variations of that. Did you have something?
I guess I'm a little confused. Are we to assume that the judge knew of the violation going into this?
She did not. She did not know about it.
What I would be
Brand new info and.
Seeing if she takes the group aside and decide whether, as a team, they should remove the sanction, or if the judge is going to wing it and make a decision without consulting the group.
Okay. Right, and this did come through during the court session. Like she got it, and then within this is like a 3-hour court session, and she got it an hour in or something. So there was no discussion previously.
So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, as a group, are we discussing what we would do as a drug court team, or as a peer reviewer, what we're observing?
This is actually kind of separate from the peer review. I'm just interested because this is a very interesting example, and again, no wrong answers. I want to show how it plays out, and then see what you guys think afterwards too, because it's very interesting. Yes, ma'am.
Well, all of our answers might be different if you show the video and
Yeah.
it puts off the judge.
Right, exactly, absolutely. Sure, sure. That's why I was like, I wanted to do the cliffhanger. We were just really excited about this video. So, yes, ma'am. Did you have something else? Right.
But we have people in the room that don't think a verbal sanction would be appropriate. So it is a group discussion.
Yeah. Yeah, right, exactly, exactly. So this is fantastic. I'm sorry, I'm glad you said that. This is just more of a kind of just program discussion, what you guys would do and seeing what you do, given, again, very limited specific information, lots missing. But I think this really speaks to going back to the peer review. When you go see these courts, you're going to run into some of this. You're going to do it among yourselves and also what you see with them. And just being aware of that people handle things very differently, and no one person is right all the time. Nobody's got this certain way that it has to be, especially with a tricky issue like this. So I can tell you're all chomping at the bit to watch the second part of this. So, yeah.
If the judge were to, in open court, look at the team and say, any concern with a verbal sanction, if you've got someone, say, a prosecutor or law enforcement, they may be concerned but not want to raise that in front of everybody because then they're the bad guy. So
right.
the team stepping back and having a conversation, are we in unity here? And then the officer said, I think she should go to jail, but not in front of the person.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But then if the officer says, yeah, there's a need, then it's so apparent that, hey, the officer wants to throw her in jail.
Right.
It's really sensitive to have people in the program are aware of who's got the power.
Exactly. So let's watch and then we'll talk again. Right? I will round it just a tiny bit so we can.
Hour test yesterday.
Okay.
I know that the hours are long, and so I'm a little concerned about her being able to get.
Shawana, here's the danger. Don't do this. You're doing good. I know, you're doing good.
Sorry.
You're doing good. Okay. You're trying to balance everything. So I will not allow you to fixate on this and say, I knew I couldn't do it. That's not true. Okay? You got a job, you worked all day, you're incredibly good and you're going to be successful. And we're going to just figure out, all I want you to do is figure out is how I manage to keep all of those things going, okay?
I cannot believe I did that.
I know, you're doing what I asked you not to do.
It's okay.
Yeah, don't fixate on it. Just fix it. You are still fabulous. So, we had all of this moment of, oh my God, this is the first time I've done such a good job. I agree with you. You still need to be proud of it. So don't let the fact that you worked all day, you weren't screwing around, right?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Don't let the fact that you worked all day focus on that until by the time you get down to the parking lot, you're like, I can't do it. That's not true.
Well, you got to push me a lot.
A lot, yeah.
But, and that's not even normal. I wasn't even supposed to be there until 4:30 yesterday, but we had the other stores, they brought us a cart of their stuff, and
right.
It was just a chaotic day. And I knew I had to UI.
All right. So we're going to fix it, right? We're going to fix it, and you are still successful, right?
Yes.
Say that to me.
I am successful.
Right.
I feel like I'm back in treatment doing mirror confronts.
You what?
That helped a lot, doing mirror confronts in treatment.
Yeah, well, turn around and tell the girls. They're pretty supportive.
Really?
No?
I am successful.
What did you say?
So, again, not to try to set anybody up, I just really wanted to see what kind of opinions people had before and after. So, thoughts now? Good, great, bad, whatever? Yeah. Right.
Is the woman all the way to the left, like the probation officer?
Yeah, all the way to left's probation.
I don't
Then
understand how the judge would know about that before court. Is there no staffing where the PO would say, hey, she missed this?
there was staffing, but they get daily updates. They have so many people in this program that their updates come just, in waves. And they can come right after court, right before, during. It's kind of all, they have they have so many tests that are going on, they just get them out within 24 hours as soon as they can. So, yeah, that would have been something had she had the information, but it just wasn't there for her. Anybody else? Good, okay. Yeah.
Well, two comments. One,
Sure.
it seemed like she really knew the participant and she knew her patterns, and so she knew how to try to stop that downward spiral. And then actually the second question, is this an all-female court?
It is a female. They separate the dockets by male and female because it's so big. So they do. It's not an all-female court, but they have court days that are male and female. Yeah. And it's interesting you say that she seems like she knows her really well. She has 1,000 participants. She doesn't know every single one of them. She couldn't possibly. But the way that she handles that and does that is really, I thought, pretty impressive too. The fact that she may not know names and faces every single time, but she clearly knows enough about them because that girl, you could tell she wanted to freak out, right? Like she was going to melt down. Can you imagine if some judge just said, all right, well, we're going to put you in jail and we'll see you next week? I mean, where do you think that would have, how much of a detour would that have taken, right? Any other thoughts? We're just interested in what people think about this one because it was relatively recent that we got it. So, yes, ma'am.
She did a really good job of motivating the audience as well.
Yeah.
She monitored the turnaround
Mm-hmm.
into the audience.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
How it motivated and how they were all receptive to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
And maybe this team, they've dealt obviously with many clients. Perhaps they know this is sort of generally what they. I mean, probably have this probably happened before, right? They
Yeah.
got an update during.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That piece. Yes. Absolutely.
They've been able to talk before, like, what can you do in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
And then they can count on, that the judge has that information, which would be great, right? Because we trust our judge is going to take this in a
Sure.
direction that we're all comfortable with. We've talked about it. We've had it happen before.
Right. I think what we take away is that depending on the circumstances, everything that everybody said was correct. If they didn't have that in place, or this was a very difficult or tricky issue, she would have done a sidebar. She would have set her aside and said, let's chat. They would have done any of the things that you guys suggested. Again, depending on just where she was at, how she had been doing, because we still don't even know how she's been doing in treatment. I can't remember exactly which treatment she had left, if it was residential or if it was like a DOC treatment or something. So, all different factors to consider. But in any case, we thought it was a really nice example of, a judge using that motivational interviewing, taking new information on, like out of nowhere, and, making a decision that I think the team can live with and what they're happy with, what they want to do with their program. So, yes, sir.
It seems like our role as a reviewer is primarily process observation versus would I have done that or not done it. I mean,
Yes.
would I have called the team up for what we call a huddle at the bench, or would I have tried to wing it? That's really what we're looking at, not she's particularly good and the guy was not so good.
Yeah.
Right, but more the process that we're using.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I think it doesn't hurt if you think they did something great and you want to let them know, though. People, it's shocking how little people hear that with what they do. But providing some, I thought it was great that the way you talked with her and just in general how you are with participants, that's not, I think you can do it in places and then again address maybe issues, again with the first judge, talking about it in a focus group, talking about it amongst yourselves and figuring out if there's a way to kind of say it, thinking about whether the judge should have a conversation with him. So I don't want to say you never do that, but absolutely your focus is on process, like you said. Any other thoughts? Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
This might not be exactly on point, but
Sure.
have you noticed if there is if the participants are giving you feedback that court looks different when the peer reviewers are there versus when they're not?
I've noticed nothing different. We had cameras here in this court. We had, yeah.
The judge seemed uncomfortable with. I mean,
No, she was totally comfortable. Absolutely, they were receptive. We talked about the whole thing. It's shocking. I think if you're moving, because my camera was set like in the witness stand, and if somebody's lying, like we really would love to get a close up and like talk about facial recognition. But if they start lying and they're already jittery, and you get up there and you start messing with that, definitely the participants would notice that. What I did is I hit record and we sat for like 4 straight hours, and I tried to sit back. I wrote notes about what was going on. I never tried to look at anybody. I made no eye contact. I stayed as quiet as possible. It's fly on the wall. If you make yourself a fly on the wall, it may be the first person, maybe the second. By the third, it's court. They are happy to see her. The people who know that they might get a sanction, they're more worried about that. They don't care about the cameras. And they prepped really well. They prepped the participants very, very well. And anybody who didn't want to be on camera or didn't want it around, we turned it off and we kind of shooed ourselves away for a bit and then came back. So, we respected their privacy. But it's open court, so, there's nothing to prevent us from doing it. But if they don't want us to record them, they have that option. So it really does depend on where you're physically located. I think if you're sitting like right next to the judge and, you're sitting right by the participants, then yeah, it might be a little distracting. But I have not noticed too many issues. I don't know if others have. But.
I was going to say, so the docket that they came to review was actually my assigned docket. And so I had done quite a bit of prep, like just letting them know there will be people in the court and, here's kind of what they're here doing. So knowing all of my clients really well and how those reviews usually go, I didn't notice any differences. And I was actually surprised. There was a couple guys I actually kind of warned them. I thought they were going to be turds, and they weren't at all. And we got feedback from both their focus group and from what we were told the focus group that our clients did, that they were very proud of their court. So, they also kind of took it as this badge of honor to have other people there and be able to talk about it and all of that. So, despite some of those guys having gripes about what was going on, they were happy to have other people there and proud to show it off a little bit.
Did someone else have that? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I didn't even catch that. The participants? No, they're fine. Sure. What I tell folks is, so with the participants, yeah, I really have never run into that issue. With the team, they're a little more sharp, a little more, everyone's going to stand at a little more attention. What I tell people is you are going to get the dog and pony show, no matter what. When somebody's coming in, you're aware of that. You are. It's natural, like no doubt about it. You can still tell a lot. A dog and pony show from a high-functioning court, it's going to be like, man, this is too perfect. And you get a dog and pony show from a court that's not running well, it's clear it's not running well. Like they're trying to do their best, but just things slip up. I had that in a program once, and we thought, man, they seem to be, everyone's saying the right thing, everything seems to make sense, but we asked those similar questions across all team members, and it was about probation violations actually, and half of them said no, a third of them said yes, and the other third didn't know. Like they were just like, what? I have no idea. I don't think so. They just kind of shrugged their shoulders. So you can get a lot, even if you feel like you might be getting a little bit of their best. They're still going to tell you everything. It's all relative, So, yes, sir.
We can ask the focus group
about yes, that is an excellent question to ask, and to start with your focus group so you don't forget. Was that a normal court session? That is an excellent question to ask first off, because they will tell you, no. The judge like usually puts half of us in jail, and defense attorney's not here, and you're just like, oh, okay. And you don't get too like excited, but just, oh, okay, sure. So tell me about, don't like dwell on that, because they may not realize what they're saying. But no, it's a completely legitimate question. Absolutely, 100%. Is that what this looks like? And they will tell you. They will tell you. This is great questions and great involvement. I think good for a break now. another 10-minute break. And if we make sure we get back at 10, because we've got to make sure we get through the rest, and then maybe we can get out a few minutes early too. So, but yeah, let's take a break now, right? Okay, we are in the home stretch here. So we're going to jump to the focus group protocol now. We've talked a lot about this with a lot of other forms, so I'm not going to get too detailed into all of these, but I'll just kind of highlight what I think is important and what things to be aware of. It is letter N, right? Yes. Make sure I have the right one this time. Yes. So we have several different documents. I think there's 3 total, and actually 4 total. This is, again, just kind of an overview of what you want to do. What I will say, peer reviewers, let me know if you guys agree with this or not. This seems to be the best part of doing the peer review, being able to talk with people, getting that feedback. People really look forward to this opportunity, and so I would, I guess, encourage you to embrace that. I think maybe the first time you do it, you might realize that you're getting a lot more info than you ever thought you would. So people love this. People really gravitate to this, and they rave about it whenever they get back. I know personally when I do my site visits, when I've done the focus groups, that's usually where I get the gold. I get a lot of stuff from teams, I get a ton from observations, but I get the most by far from the focus groups. And it's only an hour, but because they lay it on the line, they are direct, they are to the point, they realize they have an opportunity to say something without repercussions. They are very, very happy to do that. So I would definitely, this is a highlight, this should be the highlight of your visit once you go. One thing I want to make sure that people know of is that and that's why it's italicized and underlined. Your role is an outside observer. You are gathering information. You are not there to see whether or not they're telling the truth. You are not there to try to figure out if the team is saying this and the participants are saying that, whether who's saying, who's correct. You take what they say at face value. If they tell you something outlandish and crazy, I think we should never have drug tests. They should do it once every 6 months. I think it's stupid that they test us this off. Fine, let them say that. Don't dismiss that. Don't ignore it. Listen to it. Okay. Anybody else? Listen to them, because what I will tell you, if they even perceive that you are dismissive or not really listening to what they have to say, even though it might sound outlandish, they will shut down. That person or the group possibly very much will shut down. So just to be careful of that and make sure that you're always aware of how you're discussing things with them. The very first pilot site, Shannon's story, is that the judge was in there and he was friends with the judge that they were on the site visit with, and the participants were carrying on about, the judge always does this and he's locking people up and I can't believe he does these things. And the judge was like, well, he only does that because you guys are doing this, and what best practices say or that, and avoid that. We don't want any of that whatsoever. One other thing is that what I've noticed is that the focus groups really tend to mirror what a treatment group looks like, which isn't surprising. They're in groups together, especially if they've been in for years. The dynamics really take on that treatment group. So think about that when you're nominating or deciding who wants to lead that group, because what I've noticed is treatment groups, there's a lot of challenging folks. If they say something that they don't agree with, it's kind of calling them out on their things, and just that type of issue. So we want to try to be. You don't want to shut people down and say, that's like, don't say that. But you also don't want to have it turn into a back and forth between a couple of people. That can very easily spiral into that. Very, very easily. I've seen it happen. So what I usually try to just say, and I've said it many times, and it's like, hey, everybody's entitled to their opinion here today. Everyone's opinion is valued and welcome and wanted. And if you disagree, that's okay, but we're not here to figure out whether someone's wrong or right for thinking this way. And it's especially tough because what will happen is there'll be 8 people who really like the program or are okay with it, 1 person who hates it, and you get that gang up and they shut down for the rest of the time, and that's not fair to them. So, sometimes I think it's good that treatment can be there. Maybe sometimes it's not because, just how they usually do their groups. But it's something to be aware of and definitely something to think about when you figure out who's going to lead that. I don't know if you guys have any opinion on that or any other insight as far as doing it, if you enjoyed it, if you got much out of it, or anything else at all.
I had one quick observation, Adrian. I noticed, and I like that you brought that up right now, because I think that is something that I will help prep reviewers for as you get your assignments more transparently, is just that there can be a place for you to kind of have some blanket rules at the beginning of the focus group, like, you know, that this is confidential. We are not sharing your information. We're not even taking down your names. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion, and it's not right or wrong. And also, just you're getting to there right now, the ground rules, but the one person speaks at a time. And, you know, forgive us, but if, you know, this can become a really fun conversation and everybody wants to share. So if, you know, more than one person is speaking at a time, we might have to, you know, like honor somebody over the other person, but everybody will get their turn. I don't know if anybody else that's experienced that wants to comment.
And I think that one of the things that worked well in the most recent peer review we did was setting those ground rules at the beginning and sticking to them. I think to harp on Judge Green, he did a great job of doing that and keeping people on task when issues came up that weren't related at all to anything that was going on, and they kept coming up.
Yes.
And he did a good job of balancing, letting them be heard without interrupting them, and keeping the discussion moving forward. And I think having the discussion at the front end when we did these rules gave them that ground to do that. And then several of the other members on the team, seeing people that were trying to talk to help get them involved. Like Amy said earlier, there were Spanish interpreters, and so they sometimes had their own opinions they were trying to get in, but we had to kind of space who was talking when, and keeping an eye on that as well was, I think, successful for those that were conducting the review.
Absolutely.
I got dragged into it. Mandatory sentencing is appropriate. And invariably, you'll have a couple people that want to dominate the conversation, so you have to be forceful in controlling where the conversation goes. And one guy asked, "Please stop interrupting," so he did. He got up and left.
Yeah, absolutely. It may happen. I've had that happen myself too. I haven't had anybody actually leave, but that there is usually somebody who tends to kind of set that tone and wants to get more and more comfortable, especially if they have specific gripes about their situation and their case and those kind of things. And so that's why you want to steer clear of that as much as you can and try to ask those open-ended questions. We'll get to that. I guess we'll get to the specific questions, but I know that one thing I do is make sure there's just certain key phrases that people will say and to come out and you're like, man, that's great. They need to be able to hear that. So I always make sure I try to type those up because I love putting those in the reports, and people really like to read back what they're actually hearing. You just got to be careful that it's not specific to the person, and don't mention names or anything like that. And obviously, a lot of people can read between the lines when they hear. If your own participants said certain things, you would know that it's probably them. So, be cognizant of that. You can still put that kind of stuff in there, but just be very careful about singling that person out. If they're saying something great or they're happy, then I don't think that's really much of an issue. But if they have complaints or issues with the program otherwise, certainly be as careful as you can with that. So the next one, so that was. So again, this is kind of like the team member interview thing. We just had to really reiterate to folks what not to do. Do not ask the leading questions. Don't point people out and tell them to give you an answer. And if they're quiet, you can ask them, like, does anybody else want to ask? But don't actually go up. The judge actually went up and kind of tapped the lady's hand, and we were just like, oh my God, no! Please don't touch anybody. So one thing too is to consider. I don't really know a good answer about this, but some of the judges that have done these focus groups just give their first and last name. They don't necessarily say they're a judge. I think sometimes that's a really good thing, and I think sometimes it may lead to why are sentencing laws so harsh, and what did you do that? Why'd you do that to me, kind of thing. So it's really up to each peer review group to decide that and think about, you'll get a very good sense of the team and just the participants, especially if you see them in court prior. to know, what you may want to say or not say. Not that you're trying to be evasive, but just that, you run the drug court, or you're a part of the drug court, and just kind of jumping into that. So maybe one thing to consider. Again, just kind of basic stuff. I don't want to read through all of these. These are just things we've talked about. Not debating issues, asking for specific examples, asking good follow-up questions, asking them to maybe elaborate a little more. They say they don't like it. It doesn't work. Well, okay, what doesn't work for you? What do you think should improve? Those are again those same questions. What challenges do you have, and what suggestions or ideas do you have to improve the program? Those get really great responses, I found. Also, there's a question, I think towards the end of the question sheet, that says, what kind of words would you use to describe the judge or the treatment provider or whoever? I think that's also a really great one, because it makes them get more specific. It's not just a general, I don't like this, I like this, this is dumb kind of thing. It gets them thinking about the person. I get really, really great descriptions. They're just like, oh, the judges, things that you would never think. The judges, so warm, but they're like a father-like figure, and I need that. And there's just a lot of good stuff that comes from that question. This is going to be the sheet that you go over with them. It's going to include a lot of the information we just went over in the last two documents as well. You do want to make sure you tell them that there are risks. Like that's part of the IRB and everything. You just need to make sure that you tell them, even though there's very little risk, it's just that they might hear something they don't like, but you still need to make sure you say that. That they're obviously not going to get paid for this. Confidentiality, like we discussed earlier. It's confidential. Everything that they say in there, it cannot leave that room. If you bring a recorder with you, be aware that they may, feel like they can't believe you then. I have brought it on some of my visits, others I haven't. It just kind of depends on where I'm going and if I have room to pack, that kind of stuff. And it seems to not really have too much of an effect. Again, the group dynamic, once somebody breaks that wall down, starts talking, everybody starts to pour in, and they just kind of forget about what's going on, and they're just happy to be given that feedback. Voluntary, tell them if they that guy got up and left, that's fine. He doesn't get any, there's no repercussions. You don't report that. If they get a call and they say my kid is sick, I gotta go, they go. There's no questions asked whatsoever. I believe there is. And then here are the actual questions themselves. Again, just reiterating the rules and some of the parameters you want to establish. This first phase question, this is just kind of a warm-up because people are always a little bit nervous about you talking to them. It's just kind of a, hey, what group? That way it's nice and easy for somebody to say, I'm in phase 4, I've been in for 1 year. And that way at least it's kind of a warm-up question basically. So everything else though I think is pretty self-explanatory. Just try to get through as many as you can. I don't know if you guys actually get through all the questions, or was it can, depending on who's talking and how chatty they are, it may be hard to get through all of them. So just be aware of your time. I think that's it. Has anybody got any questions about that? Again, we've talked so much kind of around this and, within this. Just feel like we covered a lot of it. I don't want to keep reviewing and repeating things. Okay. So, exit interview. Debrief at the end of the site visit. What I want to make sure we emphasize here is that all the things that you're thinking while you're there, all the things that you noticed and all the things you may want to bring up are not necessarily appropriate for this debrief. This is what I would say, you don't have to do an hour. I think it can, we've done much shorter ones, 20, 30 minutes. It's very much highlighting what they're doing well, telling them, looking on the positive side, talking about what's going good, ideas you liked, things that you learned yourself while you were there, ideas you're going to steal and take back to your program, things you had never thought of, thanking them for their hospitality, that kind of thing, just letting them, letting you be in their space and that kind of thing. There should be some discussion of the recommendations or suggestions that you have, but you want to more focus on things that are, I don't want to say non-controversial, but things that there's delicate issues, the place to do it is not at this debrief, mostly because you won't have time to really prep as a peer review group. You may have a few minutes, but you really need to gather your thoughts and get your head straight about how you want to approach and talk to somebody. You don't just want to bring it up in an open meeting and then just kind of roll with it. It can definitely spiral out of control there. But focus on recommendations. Say they're not doing drug testing twice a week, they're doing it once, every week and a half or something. Talk about that. One issue we notice is drug testing isn't quite twice a week And they may have a legitimate reason. It may be a cost issue, financial issue, whatever. So just talking about those kinds of things, whether or not they have if they have 3 providers, you can talk about, well, we might recommend that you guys try to come down to 2 providers, but maybe one of them is a tribal treatment provider, so you want to have that 3rd one. So, kind of giving them caveats that you understand that, here are the issues, here are the recommendations we might talk about, but also understand that we know, there's some issues that are out of your control that prevent you from doing this. So again, this is just, what I was just speaking to is all within this process here, highlighting the positive stuff and making sure they don't have questions. People tend to have quite a bit of questions about what you're doing and what you thought of them. You might get that point blank. Be ready for that question. What did you think of us? Are we bad? Are we good? Think about what you want to say. Don't like immediately say you guys suck, because that's really not going to go well. And so that's why you want to have that. But big thing too. Make time, even if it's just 5-10 minutes, get together for a few minutes before you go in and address that team. I can't tell you how much that really means, because then you can talk about, well, here's all the things I was thinking of bringing up, and hopefully somebody's able to say, these are things that we can talk about, but they need to go into the report, and they need to be talked about over the phone on the follow-up call. They're a little more detailed. We need a little more time to prepare, be ready to talk about it in a way that's going to be helpful, so that it doesn't just kind of spiral into something that's not productive, or where they might get defensive or get upset even, coming in and telling us how to run our program kind of thing. You don't want to do that at all. Again, just highlighting those few key suggestions. Usually there's going to be a handful, and you'll know things that you can kind of talk about that won't put people on edge whenever you're talking about it. Yeah, don't single out anybody. If the prosecutor prevents people from coming in, and like if they make everybody wait 6 months to come into the program, do not talk about that. You can generally kind of discuss trying to lower the arrest to entry time. Don't talk to that participant or to that team member and call them out and make them feel like they need to be put on the spot to talk about why that's an issue, even if it's something that's not very reasonable. There's a better way to talk about it, and the better way to do it is to take time away, take a break from it, formulate what you want to discuss with them, and then talk about it on the phone. And then that way they have their opportunity to give their feedback, and they're not blindsided by what you're saying. And again, just maintaining that confidentiality between everybody. You can give focus group themes. That's actually a really big one to focus on. Is tell them like the good stuff that you heard from them. Like, oh, they love the judge. They think the judge is really listens really well and is always on their side. And treatment. Oh my gosh, I wouldn't be anywhere without treatment. So tell them those kind of things. That's great. And to highlight some of the recommendations or the key areas to improve, you'll probably get several from the focus group that you can talk about. Maybe drug testing hours are very limited, and people would like to have a little bit more time to provide them, or earlier in the day, something like that. So use all those tips and that information while you're in there. Anything else you guys want to add, or we're just kind of blowing on through here? So.
I will say one thing. I don't want this to seem like this is a Pollyanna process, right? Because we still want to be able to give constructive feedback, but we also need to make sure that it's appropriate and at the appropriate time. And the other reason why someone like Amy, myself, or Kyle will be there is we don't want to put the peer reviewer in a position to where the team might think that something will be written in the report that could impact their funding, let's say, or could impact their program capacity or their program viability. And so we want to be very cautious about not putting peer reviewers in that position. And so if there's something really critical that we are seeing happening, then that needs to be put on us and not on you guys as peer reviewers. And so that's one of the reasons why we're also there.
Great point. Thank you. Okay. So you've done all your interviews, you've done your focus group, you've done the debrief. And actually, I think did we skip one of these as far as the follow-up call? No, it's down there. Sorry. I guess one thing to bring up within the debrief, and I don't think it's actually explicitly written in there, so I don't know if people want to note this or think about this. The debrief is a good time to try to get on the schedule your follow-up call. Again, everybody's sitting there. I think the people who are going to come to the debrief are certainly going to be the folks that are going to be on the follow-up call, so it's going to be a good opportunity for you to throw out some dates and times. You don't have to necessarily set that in stone, but again, it's a very good opportunity, and you'd be surprised how often that works out, that everybody can actually agree on something within a month or so. And it may take that long. I'm sure there's not going to be anything sooner than at least a few weeks or so. But another thing to think about when you're in that debrief, talking about follow-up call, because that's the opportunity to talk about those issues that need to be addressed, and giving that constructive criticism, but doing it in the right manner and in the right time. It's the debrief and the follow-up are really, ideally, should be the whole team, in both instances. They may not have the time, they may not have the interest, they may not be able to. Maybe the judge just wants to have himself or herself and the coordinator listen in on that. It's really, truly on the court and the program themselves to see what they want to do. I would suggest, and it would be great for the team members to all be there. If you have feedback for the defense attorney and he's not there, it's not maybe going to ring as true, or you may not get any feedback for the reasoning that the reason that it is the way it is. So what you'll probably find is that it will be a somewhat smaller number of the full team, just based on availability. I think that's the real thing, and the fact that the team will the judge and the coordinator will share that information and talk about it at a policy meeting, something like that. It's a good question, though. Right. Oh, and I kind of skipped this too. I don't know if we have this in the focus group information, but thinking about the timing of everything, it is great to do a focus group after court. That's the best time, I believe, to do a focus group. Everybody's there, you corral them, it's all good to go. That's not always going to work out. It's really not. It may be that focus groups have to happen before. It may be that your focus group is one of the first things that you actually do on your visit. It's not ideal, but it still can be done. You're still going to learn a lot of information no matter what order you go in. But I tend to work backwards from let's do the focus group right after court, just because it's always so easy to do. Probably the second best option is a treatment group time. You don't necessarily want to go to the treatment provider's agency unless they're nearby. But if they have a group during the time that you're going to be there at 3 p.m. on Wednesdays, instead of going to that group, they can tell everybody to come to the courthouse, do the focus group if you're interested. If you do, you'll get a group credit, community service hours, whatever. But those tend to, I think 99% of the time with those two options, we get a focus group, and that really helps with participation. So just want to throw that in there. Okay, so you've done everything now. You've done all the different tasks. You gathered the quotes, and you've done your follow-up call. Or you've done the in-person debrief. I don't know why we have the follow-up call after all of this. I guess technically you're supposed to have this done and then do the follow-up. The timing can be kind of tricky sometimes if you may not have the report quite done. But so you come back and you use this template. And again, we wrote everything at the top here, what the blue text, what the red text means, and how to remove it, and what you're supposed to put in each one of these. I mean, it's literally just all in brackets here, what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to have. Let's see here. So this is going to be where you put the best practices table. So you're going to copy and paste that in. And once you get the preliminary one, you're going to adjust it after your site visit. So maybe they have 6 or 7 no's, but after you've talked about them, they do require that people have a job or be in school, but unless you're disabled. So they put a no, that's actually a yes, because that's all on the up and up. So you change that to yes, and there may be a few other occasions where that happens, where you adjust based on the information you gathered on the site visit. And then you'll update that and then just copy and paste and plug that in right here. Once you do that, you're going to take out, and I don't know if you guys decided on keeping just these top 16 here and using these. If they're doing these practices that are in this section here in the black text, if they're doing that, you just keep it in there. Just stays, no big deal. If they're not doing it, you'll remove it. Straightforward enough, right? Because then this next section will be your recommendations. And again, you'll go down here, and anything they are doing, you'll remove it. And so anything you removed up top will, the inverse of it is down here. So if they don't do drug testing 2 times a week, you'll take it out of the commendations, and you'll leave in the recommendation down here, which I think is, I don't know, somewhere. I don't know if that's actually in here or not. Number 11 or number 12. So in any case, it will be very straightforward, right? There's 20 of them in both sections, and that's it. You just need to remove and update it based on what they're doing and based on that table there. All right? And I guess, again, this is one of those things like we've kind of gone back and forth. I think you can keep all of them, or you can keep a handful that are the more priority ones. If there are some very key ones, you can just do, the top 5 that you think are most important. Most courts are not going to have 16 to 17 recommendations. They're really not. What you're going to probably find is they have a handful, so you'll probably just put the ones that they have in there. But if they have 20, you might need to pick the top 5 and see if they're, those are the things that they need to work on.
Yeah, this isn't about making the program perfect.
Yeah.
This is really about how do we prioritize what might, what are kind of those main issues that you as a reviewer want to focus on. Because we also don't want to overwhelm them either by saying, this is everything that you're doing wrong. And so we want to kind of shorten that list to make it just the main priorities. And then obviously the hope is they can work on those, and 3 years later when they come through this process again, they'll go to that next level of improvement.
And it may be, it's a very good possibility that, it may look something like this. It may just be these 4 here, where they need to improve or where they're not meeting the best practices. So that's all you would do is just remove everything else, keep these 4 here, and then make sure that those commendations are not above, obviously, and just leave those as well. This next section, you're going to really briefly summarize what the focus group said. General themes, whether they liked the court overall, whether some did. You can give some very basic demographics. If there was, say, 5 or 7 men and 1 woman, I don't know if I would necessarily put that in there. I know some people go ahead and do that. I tend to try to be a little more vague so they don't know exactly who it is. But you can give some demographics, talk about their phase number, just the makeup of the group very generally. And then, again, real brief, just the real big takeaways of what they thought and what their overall opinion was of the court. And then you can talk about the strengths, things they really liked. You're going to ask that question, what works for you, what's good, what's a success for you in court, and take that part of the focus group and put it in this section here, highlight that. And it doesn't need to be anything real crazy or fancy. It doesn't need to be a paragraph. It can be it can be a sentence or 2, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys are set on what it needs to look like or whatever, but it can be very simple, very basic, because it's going to be good information. And then the challenges, that'll probably be the stuff that the courts really value the most. That's what I've really heard, is there's just some things that they have never asked their participants because they're just doing so much. And surprise, surprise, the people who are going through this program have a lot of good feedback about it. We got these radical ideas of asking the people who are receiving the services what they think. So I think it's not because a drug court's bad or a team is bad, they just have not had the time, and you can't get them to honestly talk to you. So this is going to be I think courts tend to like this area too. And then again, if they offer any suggestions on how to improve the program, some of this there may be a little bit of overlap depending on what they're saying, but you kind of get the idea here. All red here, this is all things that this is what you've taken from your visit. Things that you just think are great. We had a court that did a line pass. They gave a participant as an incentive, the drug testing line was always really long at the facility, so they gave, as an incentive, participants could use this card and go up and get all the way to the front of the line, go get their UA and leave. The court loved that. Or the peer reviewers, loved that. They absolutely loved it, so they put that in the report. We think that's great. We're going to start using it now. We have started using it since we wrote this report, and participants love it. Throw something like that in there. People want to hear that kind of thing. It's really great to know that they're sharing that kind of information. Any other positives? Any other highlights? Anything we talked about with the judge who kind of helped de-escalate with that girl? If you just want to say, that was great that the judge does such a nice job of motivating her and trying to keep her calm, and just whatever. Put it in your own words. It doesn't have to be anything scientific. And then there's questions or issues that they don't know the answer to or that require research. And state's going to be able to respond to that right away, right? Within a day, I think, is probably what they're going for. But anything else that comes up, just it's kind of a catch-all. Anything else that you think is interesting? So see, I think this has complete the best practice table here, so I don't know if that's actually where it's supposed to go or not. It can honestly go in either one, but I'm just wondering if this is the most recent version, but I think it is. So in any case, sorry, put the best practice table down here. So what we'll show in the recommendations will actually, that will be, that's what we'll copy and paste some more information over. And then whenever I deleted like 16 of those recommendations earlier, if again a court has 10 or 15 of those, you'll pick 3, 4, 5 that are more important or maybe more pressing. And then if there's any in addition to that, you can put them in this section here. This is not information that you have to update. This is just for them, what to do with the report once they get it, and next steps. And then this is just kind of a form to help them try to formulate how to do that, talk about the next policy meeting, who's going to do it, what's the date, that type of thing, and just, again, gives them more information and detail about how to take those next steps. So, does that seem reasonable? Is that any questions around that?
Just add that at the end of this process, as we alluded to before, you as reviewers will then forward that along to us, myself, Brennedy, and Kyle, and we'll schedule just a really brief time just to debrief with you as reviewers about what you included in the report. If you have any questions, concerns, it can be very quick, it can be lengthy, just depending on your needs. If you guys are really confident, you love your report, you like what's in there, great. Then we'll move on to, if we haven't already scheduled the follow-up phone call with the reviewed court, then we'll assist you in scheduling that if need be. But it's also a time for you as reviewers to be able to debrief on the process to us and let us know what you liked, didn't like. We can share with you, similar to the review process, what we really loved about how you managed this or that. And we've shared a lot of details about our most recent example and what we loved about how those reviewers completed the process. But it'll be a chance for us to really validate what we liked about your process, provide any brief feedback on things we would recommend maybe improving on future reviews, but just give you a format, like I've said before, and I will continue to say, this is our first full year implementing this, and we really want to learn from you as reviewers about what you think and get a sense does or doesn't work on site. So this is a chance for you to give us that feedback so that we can improve the process for future courts going through it as well.
So I realized where I got tripped up on the language, because I know that we pull that best practice table into the final report or into the report itself. What that part is, the beginning part where I was mistaken was this. This is the part that they want attached to the end of the report. They just want you to go ahead and let the team know these are all the activities they've done. They may have seen this. They may, if they're peer reviewers themselves, they obviously know what it is. But for those courts that don't, it's just something more of an FYI. So that's the part that you throw in at the beginning, and it's at the end of the actual report. It's not in the report itself. So sorry for that mistake. And as far as the template, so now that we've, you leave in these commendations that are up top here. The recommendations here, whenever you see this, you're going to go to the next document, which I believe is T. And so you'll find the corresponding language that you need under this. So under the summary report, the first one is the problem-solving court should consider working with 2 or fewer agencies. You're going to scroll down and look for that. And it was, let's see, what number was that? So and it tells you right here, it's 4.1, this Colorado standard. So actually, I guess that's probably not going to scratch that. Sorry, don't look for that. You'll just be able to look for that here, and I think it does actually match up with 4.1 here. So yeah, so there it is, 4.1. You're going to copy this language, just like so, and literally paste it right in there. And let's put that so you can see it all on one page there. And there's your recommendations. So again, this is really straightforward, very, very simple. You see what recommendations are left. You find it in this T document. You copy this language, and you pull it back over to the report. And if you want to add your 2 cents, you want to add a little bit extra, something else you noted, maybe a focus group quote may be relevant here, may be appropriate. You can feel free to throw that kind of stuff in there too. But that's how simple we wanted to make this, because again, people see a report, they see it's a little bit long, it's like 10, 12 pages, and it just, it's hard to get yourself focused and motivated to do this. But as you can see, if you have a lot of this information in your head, you do it right after you get back. This can be done in a relatively quick fashion, right? It's not too overwhelming, I hope. But does anybody have any questions about that or feedback? Am I way off on that? Does that look okay? And then we just have a couple, and you also have them in your binders there, just a couple of final, what it actually looks like here. I wanted to walk you through because sometimes people can't quite picture how you get from the summary template to this one here. But again, they have all the recommendations up top, a few recommendations. They copied and pasted that language over, gave some feedback. Again, just see, they even did a slightly different format. They just kind of gave several bullet points and just gave a few highlights and pieces along the way. What participants enjoyed, that the counselors care about them, that kind of stuff. You can see this information is not, overly scientific, anything crazy. It's just your impressions, your opinions, and things that you think will be relevant for the team to hear. All right. So there's a couple of those, and then that's it for that. So I won't go through the second one since you've seen the first one. Now the follow-up, the final document here. So again, you want to try to schedule that during your debrief on site. If you can't get it there, you might have to follow up by email, figure out who wants to be there, what's a good time. And this is the ISCAO. I can't remember if you guys are I guess you're just kind of participating as far as once the timing gets agreed upon. But are you guys facilitating the call, or is it mostly the peer reviewer and the team kind of going at it? I don't know if there's anything you want to add about that, but does that sound right as far as your role in that?
Yeah, unless, again, I think that when we have that debrief call with the reviewers, if they identify that they want extra support from us in one area, then absolutely. But unless you guys want that from us, we'll just be kind of sitting in the background and letting you run the show.
And again, the major point of this is to talk about any issues that are a little more sensitive, maybe a tiny bit more delicate, that you just need a little bit of time to kind of think about and figure out how you want to address that and how you want to convey it to the team in a helpful manner. It's not about avoiding it, it's about doing it in a very productive and helpful way. And so that's really the thing to remember with that. And you're going to ask, once you give that feedback, here's what we're thinking about your drug testing system, or perhaps the judge's interactions, or whatever comes to mind. Ask them what they think. What are they saying about it? There's typically barriers that are in place that are out of their control that prevent them from doing a lot of these things. So note that. You want to make sure you get notes on that and state, they want to do these things. They would be able to do these if they had more funding, if they had some technical assistance or had some help in this area. They would like to move towards this. And those are things that you want to note because you want to throw that into the report, the final report, before it's actually finalized. That's just, it's not going to be too much. What we typically, I probably add maybe a handful of sentences based on a phone call, unless there's something really big and crazy going on. But otherwise, you get a little bit of feedback, you see what they think about it. Make sure you give them a chance to review it, actually. I'm sorry, I skipped over that. You need to send it at least a day or so before you have your phone call with them, too. I typically don't try to give them that much time. I think if they have a week or so to look at it, people really start to dissect it and really get focused on, words and semantics and just every little thing. But then when you have the call, they can kind of realize, because that's when you're starting to talk about recommendations possibly that they may be a little defensive about or, maybe a little unsure of hearing. So, if you have that call the next day, then they'll know the tone of the call is not about the deficiencies and the issues and what the state's going to do now to affect their funding and those kind of crazy things that people start to think about. So make sure you just give them a day or two, and that's typically enough. If they want to share it with the team, if they're just going to share it with the people that are going to be on the call, it's their call. It's up to them. There's no there's no rules around that. We would just stress and hope that most of the team could make it, if not all of them. So. Trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, again, I don't want to go through and read all of this stuff. You can kind of see what it is, and that will be a lot of the information and details that you'll go over once you're on the call yourself with them. So, yeah, is there any questions on that one? Is that reasonable too? So this last half, I purposely made sure I could get through it a little quicker because I knew we'd get to the end of the day here, and people might be waning a bit. So, do you guys have anything else to add, or are there any general questions? Anything we didn't cover? Anything that doesn't make sense? Did people forget about the gifts already? Did they forget about that? Damn, I was hoping so. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. So. Oh, I wonder how I should do this because there was a lot of people who were very involved, and so. I don't know if we should just vote, or should I just pick maybe who I thought was most invested? Because I feel like, man, people might get mad if they don't get something now. I didn't think that it would be that great, but Amy told me it was kind of nice that I did this. So. Let's see. Otherwise, I guess everybody's free to go, right?
Technically, this report would be accessible through open records, right? But, so that's why some of this has to be in a discussion format. Certain things may be better in a discussion. But we don't have plans to distribute these reports widely. That's not the purpose of them.
And for the most part, we will do one site visit. Or we can do multiple site visits.
I think it's a personal choice. Okay. And so if this is something where you're like, this is all I have time for, great. If this is something where you feel like you want to stay fresh and this is part of your own development and how you feel like this is maybe something that you love about your job, then then we will certainly utilize you.
That can definitely be a part of your debrief with us afterward. What was your experience? What did you like, not like? What would you want your role to be moving forward? And if we're like one of those people that are doing multiple sites, you don't want us to reference other sites in that final report saying that they could benefit doing blah, 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 like's done in the 18. Or is that something that would be beneficial?
Yeah, I think depending on I think in a positive context, I think that can be great. And you can also share things like, I know another jurisdiction that does this, and then we can become the dot connectors, right? So we can say, here's the coordinator for this jurisdiction. They can give you more information.
So if there's certain targeted things that you want to focus on in your report, that's another thing can assist with, is if we know of any resources that can help support that. For instance,
So I just want to end with, I've seen a lot of states, I've seen a lot of state systems, their buy-in, their structure. You guys are up there. You definitely are. I'm so very happy to be able to do this today, and I hope that this really starts to take off and that you guys do, great things with this, because it will be a model for other states to follow and be a really good thing for nationwide. So I really appreciate your time, really appreciate the attention. I can tell I didn't actually have to bribe you, but I'm glad that I went ahead and did that because you guys are great. So I just thank you again for all your time and attention. So I have singled out, so you three, since you did your peer review, so you guys are coming up, and you'll get something, you back there, and then I think, Judge, I'll have to pick on you. Yes, you have to come up. You have to at least look. If you pass, that's cool, and then you can give it to somebody. So come on up, and then I guess everybody's dismissed. So, in case anybody really wants to see, my wife makes handmade jewelry, and she let me take some of her stuff because she makes a ton of it. She's crafty, so I brought some extra. So Mother's Day. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you were able to. Awesome. So I have some earrings here.